The story begins on Tianmen Mountain in northwestern China. Dozens of people walk the cliffs in the middle of the night with torches looking for it. An unknown guy has been sitting in one of the caves for half a month now, searching for unknown manuscripts. He manages to find them. They are full of unknown symbols, yet he is fully convinced that they are the very manuscripts he has been searching for so long. From his words, we learn that the manuscripts belong to a sword master who lived 600 years ago, and they contain information about a legendary technique. The guy who found the tech thinks about keeping it, but his dantian is damaged, so it doesn't make sense. Guy realizes the importance of this manuscript and knows that other martial artists will want to steal information about the technique from him. He decides to hide it in his mouth by dipping it in bamboo beforehand so as not to attract attention. This kind of bamboo in the mouth makes you thirsty and uncomfortable, making our kid already wish he had brought water with him. In a moment, he is interrupted by a guy with a sword and an old man in a robe standing nearby. The guy with the katana addresses our hero as a member of some blood cult and immediately asks about the manuscripts, and the old man in the robe turns out to be the head of the Golden Dragon clan. The boy with the manuscripts, already known to us, addresses the old man as a gentleman and informs him that he has indeed found the manuscripts, after which he has put them in a safe place. Our hero offers to give the manuscripts to the old man in return for the fulfillment of some promise, but the old man interrupts him and asks about some bloody worm. When our young man confirms the information about a certain bloodworm, the guy standing next to the old man starts to bare his katana. He interrupts the dialogue between the old man and the young man by saying that there is no need to fulfill any promises. He tells the young man that even if they manage to eliminate the bloodworm, our kid still has no place to go back to. After coldly looking into the young man's eyes, he informed him that he had been expelled from the clan due to his dantian being destroyed due to his high level of Kai. He proceeds to tell the young man his biography and reminds him that immediately afterward, a blood cult stole him and a bloodworm was placed in his chest. After all these events, the young man has become a puppet of this cult and is forced to do their bidding. Our young man got excited. He didn't expect this samurai with a katana to know everything. The samurai puts his katana to the boy's neck and asks him to give up all the manuscripts he's found. With a sneer, the samurai offers to help the young man get rid of the worm in his chest if he will hand over all the records. Two opinions clash in the young man's mind. He doesn't know what he should choose. He informs the swordsman that he has hidden all the records in a single location that only he knows about. Our young man holds out his hand and informs the swordsman that he is not asking for any privileges or acceptance into their sect, but just wants to get rid of the worm and live a normal life. Afterward, he offers the swordsman first to make a move and rid him of the worm in his chest in exchange for the manuscripts. This dialogue makes the old man passionate. He enters the dialogue calling the young man cunning and smiles. A second after that, the samurai's katana stabs the young man's body through and blood spatters across the room. With a smirk on his face, the samurai says that such actions were obvious from the spy, and he is willing to take the bet, for he knows that all the manuscripts are stored in the young man's body. The guy doesn't have the strength to speak, and with only blood coming out of his mouth, the realization comes to him that they were originally going to kill him. The swordsman abruptly pulls the katana out of the kid's body, calls him Seo Unhui, and asks him not to hate them. With an angry face, the swordsman continues to taunt the kid and talks about how he was destined to die back when he became a spy. The swordsman gloats non-stop and delivers blow after blow to the guy's body. But in a moment, the swordsman notices that he's cut a chip of bamboo that came out of the guy's mouth along with the blood. He is greatly surprised, though he himself had said a little earlier that the recordings were inside the young man, but apparently it was a bluff. There was no limit to the surprise as the room's aura turned blue. The kid spy's body is covered in blue flames, as is the room's aura. The guy's mind is a muddle, for his body is on fire, but he's not hot at all. His eyes are slowly closing, but the guy doesn't care anymore. He hopes that if there is a second life, it will be much better than the one he had. With a scream from the cold, he wakes up in an unknown place, and two men in blue and red kimono with buckets in their hands are standing nearby. Our hero wakes up abruptly, takes his hand to his stomach, and realizes that it's still his body, but without the cuts and scars from the burns. The first thing he hears after laughing is the insults. The guys next to him call him an ass, but it is not this that surprises him, but with everything else, the voices telling him this seem very familiar. In front of his face are two very similar-looking men, Jwabek and Woo-hyun, who inform our hero that they managed to get him drunk again yesterday. Our hero is again surprised, but not by this, but by the fact that he had previously been acquainted with these guys as a child. The most important surprise happens now when our hero sees himself in the mirror, where in front of him he is, however, at a younger age. All his wondering is interrupted by a sharp stab in the back from this one of the identical men, who is surprised that our kid still supposedly hasn't sobered up. This kick awakens our hero, reminding him that the pain is real and everything around him is not a dream. He then jumps out of bed, grabs one of the men by his robes, and asks him to tell him what day and year it is. While they have a micro-misunderstanding with the man in blue, the man in red standing next to him gives the date as August 9th, cycle 11. Our guy is savvy that if today is August 9th, cycle 11, it's exactly 10 years before he dies and burns in flames. The guy who called the date is also surprised and wonders if our hero has gone to the roof. Deep surprise is replaced by intense joy. Our hero realizes that he has returned to the past and shouts with joy because he is glad to see them all. But the joy is again replaced by surprise as he begins to replay in his head all the details of that time and remembers different moments. On the same day, it is already night outside. An unknown group of individuals are walking around the houses. Some unknown guy goes outside, suspecting visitors have arrived. Immediately afterward, however, one of the unknown guys cuts off his head right on the street. Another young guy also goes outside, but there are several dead bodies in front of his eyes. The events of the story bring us back to our hero, who in a hurry among things is trying to find something very important. Parallel to this, he approaches two identical guys, asking them to leave if they don't want to die. Our protagonist smiles because he manages to find the sword he has been looking for all this time. Among other things, this sword is the last memory of his mother. As it turns out, this sword was lost to him in his past life. Also, our hero is thinking of some kind of escape, and the safety of this sword is paramount. All events are interrupted by a sharp scream that was so thunderous that it was as if the whole place shook in the moment. Our hero and two identical guys began to listen and analyze the source of the screams. According to their personal feeling, the scream came from the street, but in our hero's opinion, the scream was too close, hence it was not from the street. Our hero hides his sword behind his kimono, and in his thoughts he realizes that certain events are beginning to happen, because of which now is clearly not the time for discussion. They decide to go to the door together, opening it a little to look outside to make sure of what is going on. On this day, August 9th, 11, our hero was kidnapped by a blood cult in his past life. Two guys wonder who it is, suspecting they are bandits, but our hero tells them that they are cultists from a blood cult. Our hero informs the brothers that they and he should run away urgently if they want to live. Our hero decides that now is not the time to look after them, because in his past life, after the kidnapping, they became martial arts masters, so there is nothing to worry about, he thought. But as he thought back to that day, he noticed that in his memories, he also saw another guy who was with them. The protagonist realizes that he can't leave him because he will be important to him in the future. With all his legs, he ran to Sun's room, for that was his name. Running into the room, he abruptly woke Sun, who pretended to be awake but was clearly very surprised. Without thinking long, our hero grabs Sun's hand and drags him behind him, telling him that they need to leave immediately. Running out into the street with Sun, they try to find the best and safest way out, and along the way, our hero tells Sun what happened. Finding the best route is difficult, as the city is completely surrounded. The dream suggests going home and hiding in the closet, because they don't need things and money but people. so there's no reason to go through closets. The protagonist explains to Sun along the way about how these places are obvious, and the first place they will search is them. Sleep wonders if he is destined to be captured or killed. Our protagonist, along with Sun, are heading towards an unknown door. They are in search of a place where the blood cultists would not come close to looking, even if they thought of it. When they opened the very door they were heading for, they found a latrine. According to the master, that's what Sleep called our hero. They should go down there, because they wouldn't be found there. Sleep sincerely resisted this choice, and did not want to hide in the latrine. In parallel, he thought of some other options. After pushing Sun down into the latrine, our master headed off to find a hiding place for himself, for he had originally planned to hide in the latrine. He didn't have to run far, however. Right in front of him he saw a stable, near which was a large wooden trough full of hay. He let the horse go, and himself climbed into the hay and covered himself with it. By his calculation, the cultists would be looking for the horse, not him. However, our hero does not forget that among them there might be owners of strong techniques who would find him in this way, so he immediately took the sword in his hands. Immediately after he picked up the sword, that sword suddenly spoke. Though it would be more correct to say screamed, it screamed at the young man to let go of it, for his hands were dirty. Our Lord is pierced with shock. He had seen everything, but the talking sword in his hands was something surprisingly new. While our hero held the sword tightly with his hands, the man began to tell us that he was a mom's prized possession that this guy had just stashed in his bag. But then the sword began to be shocked as well, for this was the first time the man answered him. He expected to be talking to himself again. Immediately after, a small spirit girl, more like an elf, flew out of the sword and asked our hero if he could see her. But our hero takes her for a hallucination and is very much surprised by everything that happens. As a consequence of the shock, he begins to pretend that he doesn't see or hear her, and doesn't know what she's talking about at all, which infuriates the avatar of the sword in the girl's face. However, our hero interrupts their beginning dialogue with a request to be silent because he heard people near the stable. But she refuses his request and continues to babble on, citing that no one else can hear since he's the first person she's ever spoken to. One of the cultists who were near the stables notices a trail leading towards this trough. One of the blood cult members unsheathes his sword and heads towards the trough, having already approached it. At this unsettling moment, the avatar of the sword begins to wonder if our hero will have the courage to kill the cultist. The avatar of the sword says this for a reason, for he can hear how hard the kid's heart is beating at this moment. At this moment, he remembers how in his past life, a cruel samurai bullied him right before his death. His hand is covered in a red aura from anger and emotion. In the moment, he feels a tremendous rush of strength and indescribable feelings. On the flow of these powers, he flies out of the hay trough and pierces the cultist with his sword. As a result, one of the members of the blood cult falls to the floor covered in blood. Immediately after this moment, in his mind, he replies to the sword that he is not afraid. He is excited. He promises to endure in this life despite all obstacles, and asks the avatar of the sword to observe this. Sword Avatar is surprised by this. In her opinion, he's always been just another Song family idiot who just drinks with his brothers every day. The Avatar continued to ask questions, but our hero makes decisions to ignore her. Our hero knows that cultists always move in threes, hence there are 2 more in the vicinity who will be arriving here soon. The Avatar once again distracts our hero So Un-hui while he contemplates a plan of action, to which the Avatar is rudely asked to fuck off. This time, she decided not to just chat, but to inform Sue that there was another cultist behind him. There was indeed a calm cultivator at the back, who just stood there and observed the entire situation. He informed So that he was interested in watching him kill his partner. Our hero tensed up even more than before, as he noticed the brown belt on the cultist's robe, which meant that the cultist had reached a medium level, so he was more dangerous than the others. Sao prepared himself for battle. However, his thoughts were on something else entirely. He blamed himself for not being as attentive to the enemy. The sword avatar immediately offered to help because she couldn't wait to see the full power of the sword. Su was interested in the cultist's skills. He even put him at about the average level he himself possessed. Sao decides to provoke him by calling attention to the fact that he called him one level with himself, and afterward told the cultist that he was just afraid of ending up like his partner. The cultist exposes his sword and says that judging by our hero's behavior, he is trying to avoid the fight at all costs. Immediately after that phrase, a second later he is above Su's head with a sword that is already aiming its strike at Su's neck. Part of Su's hair was cut off, but he managed to dodge the blow, but he was also surprised, not a little. Immediately afterward, Su strikes back, practically touching the cultist's face with his blade. However, he manages to grab hold of Sao's arm, thereby stopping a potential strike. Though the blow failed and Su himself was grabbed by his arm and lifted up, the cultist appreciated his abilities, but Su's sword began to fall out of his hand. Cultist suggests that So ignore the fact of killing a low-ranking member and go with him, but So has other plans because he has already managed to let go of the sword he was holding in his hand and grabbed it from underneath with his other hand, then struck a sharp blow. Gaining his footing, Su released himself, and a straight punch hit right into a mid-ranked cultist. But only Su himself thought so, as the cultist had only slightly failed to dodge. Su managed to wound the eye of the cultist, but not eliminate it. With a sharp side leg kick, the cultist sends Su flying. Landing a few meters away, Su blames himself. He was overconfident after his first victory, but decides to continue the battle head-on anyway. The sword avatar intervenes in their fight again and offers to help, but Su is reluctant to believe that it will actually do anything to help him in such a situation. Cultist informs him that he originally wanted to be polite, but he doesn't intend to tolerate this kind of attitude. Using the technique, he decides to kill Su. He bared his sword, however, this time it was with a red aura, and headed running towards Su. Su knows something about that aura and sword, for at the sight of it, shock overshadowed all emotion. The strong strike of the cultist's blade was received by Su's sword, however, with great difficulty. Sao didn't have time to see the attack, but he could immediately assume it was one of the blood cult arts. With each blow, to Su comes the realization that he's not intentionally aiming his punches at lethal points, but simply taunting the body. Our hero is in a huge misunderstanding, because all he can think of is to hit the same thing every time and hope for the best. The sword avatar intervenes in the fight, prompting So in his ear that the strike will be a head right down the center. This sudden precision of resistance from Su gives the cultist a shock, as he stopped the strike simply by placing his sword in the right position. Su himself is also in shock at the realization that he just managed to stop an attack from a cultist of that level. The avatar of the sword, after seeing this, decides to remind him that it was because of her that the attack was stopped, and if it wasn't for her, he would have died. She also mentions that this cultist's attacks are primitive, and she had no trouble spotting them. This time Su felt bad, since all this time from only gagging her, and now he decided to ask for help himself. Calling our hero a rare creature, she agrees to help him, as he is the first person to speak to her in 47 years. She also asked if So has a plan, but in his current state, it is hard to think of a plan. Together, they come to the conclusion that after what they have seen, he will keep his distance, and it will be hard to strike, so they decide to provoke him. Meanwhile, Cultist also begins to succumb to analyzing the situation, but comes to the conclusion that he was only lucky, and nothing more. Su and the sword avatar decide to act. On the avatar's advice, Su will start by blocking and stalling. Cultist was once again perplexed, as his attack was again repelled, and it was thanks to the avatar and So working together. Also causing a problem for the cultist is the blood from his wounded eye, which creates blind spots, which is exactly what the sword avatar is counting on. That's exactly what happens. After another repelled attack, So goes behind the cultist's back, thus fooling him, and the sword avatar informs him that it's time to strike. But it didn't work. The cultist couldn't be caught off guard, and he delivers a strong kick to the side of Sao's body. Closing his hand with his sword, Su flies out, and lands in the water, which helps to mitigate the effects, as the kicking was very strong. So is in the water, and it would seem that he has no strength at all, but the cultist doesn't stop. Jumping high and bringing his blade straight up in the air, he pounces on So. But misses, and So strikes with his last strength at the sword avatar's command. This was a turn of events the cultist hadn't expected, and the attack launched by So cut into his neck. So is both pleased, exhausted, and shocked at the same time, as he finally managed to defeat the cultist. The cultist was defeated, and So and the sword avatar began to discuss their combined efforts in fighting him, the sword avatar noticing Sao's good acting as he very cleverly pretended to be someone who had no strength at all. Their conversation is interrupted by a sharp, unknown blow that the sword avatar warns them about. But So doesn't have time to react. His fist was covered with the same power as that cultivator's sword, but just a fist was enough to make So's neck twist and his face flood with blood. A man appeared in front of So and the avatar, his clothing slightly different, but he immediately mentioned that he had come here, for his two partners had not returned. There were strange white effects around his feet. He was surprised by the fact that they had both been defeated by a human. With a single fist strike, he sent a knockout to So, who was lying all bloody and unconscious on the floor. After some time amidst this, So wakes up, but he is surrounded by a bunch of cultists in robes. Several people in robes were discussing So, deciding if they needed him, but they concluded that there was no point in practicing even with him if he had a dantian. They were also surprised to see the fact that So had managed to go to the bathroom under himself during their dialogue. Shouting pitifully, Sao promises that he's even willing to spy on them so that they won't kill him. He regrets being in the same situation again as in his previous life, but remembers about the sword, addressing the avatar as Sodan. He decides to find out how long it has been out. To So's surprise, his sword Sodan does not respond. So himself attributes this to the fact that the sword is not in his hands. One of the leaders is holding a sword, examining it. He speaks of his surprise. He was shocked to learn that Sao had killed two of his men. This time, So is pleased with the fact that they have a good opinion of him, because last time they didn't take him at all. In the moment, all of So's thoughts were shattered, for one of them spoke of not being taken. One of the men argues with the captain, saying that this mid-level man would be useful, but the leader doesn't want to take people without dantian. Seeing a very grim environment, So starts begging for mercy and says he is willing to do anything as he did in his past life. His pathetic pleas only make the captain laugh, and he asks Sao to pay with his life for killing two of his men. One of the cultists raised his sword above So's head at the order of his captain and was already ready to lynch him. As if in slow motion, So's entire life was flying before his eyes. He was desperately trying to find a way out, but he couldn't see it anywhere. However, the moment of execution is interrupted by the laughter of a burly man heard behind the cultist captain. Our hero recalls the sword that was held firmly and beautifully on this man's belt. He recalls seeing this man before. Just his aura alone is enough to realize that he is terrifyingly strong. Seconds after that, So drops his head down and starts bowing, calling the man in the robe the fourth star of the blood cult, and then starts praising him. The man approached the captain and asked why it was so noisy, but the captain was in no hurry to answer, for he was shocked at the visit of such a man standing behind him. All the cultivators kneeled down at once and began to salute the fourth star of the blood cult. Due to the fact that our hero was already in their cult in his past life, he is well aware that there are 11 blood cult leaders, 4 honorable ones, and 7 blood stars. Our hero is significantly surprised, because before, in his previous life, he could not even see them. But he had heard of rumors that blood stars could disguise themselves as ordinary servants and watch over squads, and as it turned out, the rumors weren't lying. The man approached Sao and insistently asked him to raise his head. In front of us was him, Do Chanho, one of the 4 stars of the blood cult, and he was immediately pleasantly surprised by the fact that So had managed to figure him out. So told him that he was able to recognize him because of his sword and its hilt, for So knew that the hilt with the thin white brush was made in honor of a dead stallion that had belonged to Chanho. The answer interested him greatly, and he immediately decided to find out how it was that Su, who was not in the blood cult, knew about it. Sao didn't know what to answer immediately. He could feel the tension, even though he had been in situations like this hundreds of times while he was a spy. It wasn't easy to answer one of such a high-ranking person. Among all the lies he could think of, he chose the most unusual. He said that the blood of the cult flowed in his body. Such statements embarrassed the captain and the others, but Changho himself did not raise an eyebrow and continued to listen to Sao's lies. Sao continued to lie, making up a story about his grandfather supposedly being part of a blood cult long ago, but having been seriously injured, he was forced to wander the lands, and he found his home in the city of Luoyang. There he put down roots, and in the future, Sao's father and mother gave birth to him in the same city. This story was getting more and more interesting to Changho. He asked Su to continue the story. Nudging his blade slightly and placing his hand on it, he continued to listen to Su. However, he was shocked that this story was not enough. He continued his lie, telling him that when his grandfather trained him, he often brought up the wolf squad. He always reminded his grandson that when he was his age, he had already been through captain-level training. As he continued to lie, he recounted that his grandfather had always said that sooner or later, the blood cult would find his grandchildren and take them, until his death. Changho believed it all. To him, it was a direct explanation for how a weak Su without a dantian could defeat two blood clan warriors. But Chunho still had a question for Su, but he was interrupted by the squad captain, who told him not to listen to this brat in Su's face. This made the blood star angry. His aura turned red again, as did his eye. He said he didn't know about the captain's right to judge the star's decisions. Immediately afterward, the captain fell to his knees and began to beg forgiveness for his behavior. This was an indicator for So, as just a couple of words from one of the stars was enough for the captain to go into shock and start apologizing on his knees. Changho looked at So again and asked the obvious question, why the man didn't reveal his identity right away, but hid himself even in front of the captain. Sao started bowing again, and immediately justified himself by saying that he was afraid of being held accountable for killing these cultists. Su immediately noticed that he had managed to weave lies with the truth well, and it would hardly arouse suspicion. A second after finishing his speech, he heard laughter from the Bloodstar's side. He apologized for his cruel joke and said he was willing to accept Su into the cult since they are essentially brothers. Su continued to lie, saying that he would be honored, and the supposedly existing grandfather would be happy about it. However, Su was upset in his heart, for he realized that Rebirth had lost its meaning. He was once again in that cult. Su continued to make a satisfied look. He bowed and said he was very happy to rejoin the cult after his grandfather. But the Bloodstar interrupts everything again, saying that he is ready to fulfill any of his wishes, because their meeting was destined by fate. Su was shocked by such a suggestion, since the cult star herself is going to absolutely his every wish. His request was obvious. He asked for the return of his sword with which he had defeated two cultists. Immediately afterward, Chanho asked the captain to return the sword. He did not immediately agree, but did not argue with the star for long. Before handing it back, Chanho inspected the sword, calling it good, though old. At the moment of handing the sword back into Su's hands, Changho decided to take tribute for the blood spilled at Su's fault, and with just a little finger on the sword, he broke part of it, thus shortening it even more. He returned the sword and asked to swing it thoughtfully next time. The strength of the kai with which he broke and guided the sword back into Su's hands was incredible, and Su himself took it as a warning. Immediately after that, Sedan's avatar emerged from the sword, who was left without part of her hair after the sword broke. She was very angry with Su. In the wake of one of the stars, Sedan also managed to say some nasty things and threats that she would have nailed him. However, right after that, a serious question came from Sedan. She was interested in whether Sao was really a member of the blood cult. He didn't reveal all the cards right away, but he promised to tell Sedan everything, which made her tense because she didn't think it was anything serious. A couple seconds after that, he only briefly said that from the future, which made Sedan tense up even more. But things didn't end so happily, for when he approached the captain, he asked that agents be sent to Sao's hometown to identify relatives on his mother's side. Chang-ho wasn't as simple as he had shown himself to be. He had analyzed all of Su's movements and looks, and suspected that the latter might be a spy of great seniority. While Chang-ho and the captain were talking about Sao, the latter was telling Sedan his life story, and how he had been reborn, how he had been a spy, and how he had found himself in the cult. Sedan believed his story and began to analyze it. It was a strange moment for her that he could only see and hear her after he was reborn. After the whole fascinating story, Sedan's only conclusion was that he was very unlucky, because even after his death, he still returned to those cultists. She also thought it could have been avoided if Su had left Sun and hid in the bathroom, but Su rejected the idea. According to him, in his past life, it was Ah Xiong who had saved his life during a battle by taking the blow with his body, and thus Sao wished to repay the incident from his past life. Quickly switching from Ah Xiong's topic, they began discussing how they both could survive among the cultists now. Sedan actively encourages Su not to become an errand boy, but to take advantage of the information he already has at this point. Sound realizes that Sedan is very much in the right, and decides to use the knowledge he's gained during those 10 years of life as a blood cult spy. Sedan also actively insists that Su should take up the study of martial arts, but he doesn't really like the idea himself, as he doesn't believe in his ability to fight without that sword, and even with it, not very much. Sedan insists, however, saying that even a dog can be taught to recite poetry, so Sao can do it, even though he's not a dog. After dozens of screams from Sedan, Su still agrees to listen to her talk about the basics of martial arts. But then something strange happens. A blue fire appears in the area of his torso, covering his body, as if it was the time he used the technique accidentally, shortly before his demise in his past life. The fire continues to swell through his body, frightening our hero more and more. After a few seconds, his consciousness seems to disappear. He feels himself among the stars, and before his eyes it is as if the whole cosmos, and only he alone, is a particle of something alive floating in this abyss of stars and space paths. Teluso floats in space while he himself has no idea what's going on, a sense of deity and bondage in one bottle. An unknown voice says that the universe will open with the acquisition of the Sword of the Heart, but our hero immediately notices that this voice does not belong to Sedan. A huge blue aura right in the middle of space was shining brightly. Yes, so much so that it even blinded Su. Taking one breath, Su goes back in, but his brush is still covered in that blue flame. The real world didn't change. Right after Su returned to consciousness, he was greeted by the screams and yells of Sedan, who scolded him for being distracted forever. Su asks Sedan to look at his hands. He hopes he's not the only one to see that star-like aura. Sedan starts yelling at him again as he just pokes her hand, saying there are some stars on it, even though Sedan can't see anything but a normal hand. Sedan is finally offended after this incident, and hides using his powers, while Su still sits there in incomprehension as to why only he is the only one seeing this strange fire on his hands. Sao lies down on the hay and continues to examine his hand, not realizing what it is. This fire reminds him very much of that rebirth effect. Meanwhile, the wagons with the prisoners and Sao had arrived at their destination, and Sao spent the rest of the road trying to awaken that fire on his hand, for it had gone out. As he stepped outside, he was blinded not only by the sun, but also by the size of the area they had come to, and where there were a bunch of cultists. Sedan woke up and immediately started asking Su about where they had come to. He in turn explained to her that it was a training camp for kidnapped children. A man dressed in black stood out in front of everyone. According to Sao, it was the teacher and leader of this place, Gu Sangwoon. Some unknown big guy pushed Sao in the shoulder with his shoulder right as they were talking, and also called him an ass. Sao turned around and in front of his face were his two look-alike brothers, Juabak and Wu Yun. Their appearance greatly surprised So, for he thought they had escaped immediately after their dialogue began. Juabek inquired why Sao was not bound like the others. So only said that it was a very long story and he would tell it sometime, but such an answer did not please his brother, and he immediately asked him to tell him everything now. Their dialogue was interrupted by one of the cultists. Standing on the stage, he addressed everyone loudly, asking them to pay attention to him and listen. Cultist was ranked near the captains. He pointed a finger behind the podium behind him, and the order to run to it on the count of 3. From the crowd came a shout from Juabek. He asked for them all to be untied to begin with. He was interrupted by Su, who told him to listen to himself if he wanted to survive, of course. Immediately after that, it was as if Su had gotten off the chain and ran forward at a very fast pace. The two brothers don't realize what's going on, but make decisions to flee without even noticing that one of the cultists with a naked sword was already standing behind the crowd of captives. A second after that, the sound of carnage is heard and blood splattered. Those at the back of the crowd began to be killed, right in front of their loved ones. The So brothers don't understand what's going on, but decide to obey their brother in everything, as they think it will help them survive. The teachers immediately notice the fact that Su ran in first and bowed his head, which amazes them, because it's the first time they've ever had such an incident. The others don't know that they should bow their heads. While thinking about this, they recall the captain's report, where he tells them that there is a cult heir among the captives. This provides an explanation to the teachers as to why his behavior is such. That's where Sudan comes in, once again suspecting Su of being a cultist, but he turns her doubts around, saying that he already has experience and acts in a way to prove his words. Their dialogue is interrupted by the cultist teacher, who again asks everyone to pay attention. He informs us that everyone here was chosen by a blood demon, and that fact is a huge part of their destiny. The captives were shocked by this. One of them immediately expressed his displeasure, shouting loudly that they were just murderers and kidnappers. Sodan agrees with this prisoner, but doesn't understand why he thought it was okay to yell about it like that. Meanwhile, So assumes that he's the one who will be shown exemplary punishment. Sao turns out to be right, because a second after that, that guy's head splits in two with the sword of one of the cultists. Sodan doesn't understand what they've gone through all this for if they're killing captives anyway, but Sao explains that to bring back the cultists they're creating through fear, which they're succeeding at. Sodan is shocked again. She doesn't understand how Su has even survived here in his 10 years of past life, but he explains it by hiding all the time and being obedient like a dog. After the scene with the captured guy was over, the head teacher spoke again, informing them that they could now begin the induction ceremony. Choosing who to start with, his choice obviously fell on Su, and the first question he asked was if the man knew what was in the box his assistant was holding. Without hesitation, in the blink of an eye, Su replied that they were bloodworms, and he was completely right. The teacher had expected such a response, and immediately afterward, he invited Sao to explain to everyone else what bloodworms were. Su knew all about them, and immediately explained that the worm was spiraled into the body of the cult's newcomer in order to keep his loyalty in mind. After that, he also added that after inserting the worm, it is worth taking a special sedative medication every 24 hours, otherwise the worm will start raging inside. One of the identical brothers, who was near Su at this time, immediately tensed up and asked how he knew all this. Without waiting for Su to answer, he heard the teacher call Su a descendant of the cult. This raised even more questions for his brother. He immediately suspected that Su had been a spy for the cult all along. So Dan's taunts followed, calling Su a spy from her past life, but he told her not to laugh because he was already having a hard time dealing with it. The teacher immediately took the worm out of the box and invited Su to be the first to stick it into his body to prove his devotion to the cult and kinship. So realized there was no way to avoid the worm, and besides, he was right in the center of attention. Su continued to lie and began to thank his teacher for giving him the honor of being the first to do so. All the while, from afar, Commander O, who was involved in the operation and leading the squad, was watching So and the acceptance ceremony. It appeared that this captain was preparing something. It was clear from his thoughts that he didn't like Su and would try his best to expose his lies. So swallowed the worm, thus starting an irreversible process, and afterward bowed and thanked the blood demon as is proper. After Sao's example, the teacher asked everyone to repeat after him by doing the same thing. Sodan was pretty well freaked out. To her, something like this is a complete abomination. She genuinely doesn't understand how Sao lived with him for 10 years. Right during their conversation, a strange thing happens. So gets sick. It's the first time it's ever happened to him. As our hero himself says, the worm shouldn't just rage, however it does, but the pain is different, though clearly in the place where the worm is. So notices Captain O standing there watching his torment. He immediately suspects him of what he has done. The cultist teacher also doesn't understand what's going on and tries to ask Su about it. Standing nearby, Captain O chuckles, saying that it shouldn't be a problem for someone who is a descendant of a cultist to go through such a thing. Su is only getting worse. He is perplexed and tries to ask what Captain O did to the worm in his body. The teacher notices everything and asks Captain O if everything is okay, to which he gets approval. The captain assures the teacher that Su awakened the worm while swallowing it. Captain O walks closer to Su. Crouching down on his knee, he places his hand on Su's shoulder and asks him to turn his back in order for him to stop the worm with a basic technique. However, Su prevents the captain from using the technique and tells him that he's pretty much completely fine by now. Captain O asks Su to cover his lower abdomen, but Su still asks him to stop. And then the main climax occurs. So simply farts violently, after which the pain disappears and the captain is in wild shock. So reports that he is fine, though he is embarrassed, and Captain O is shocked beyond belief at this point, as his nose smells the usual stench. After a while, Sodan shows up and is just crying with laughter. She can't believe that Su farted on the captain of the cultist squad. But Su himself is not to be trifled with everything, as he still doesn't realize what really happened as the pain has gone away. However, his train of thought was once again interrupted by his brother, who was wondering where they should go now. Before they could discuss a plan of next steps, they were again interrupted by a loud voice asking for everyone's attention. Captain O decides to set up a rank test, telling everyone to stand in their seats and wait for orders. Su is surprised because last time there was a different examiner, hence this change comes from Captain O wanting something again. The captain points his finger at the caves behind him, informing him that that is where the testing will take place. In each cave, the blood cult examiners are arranged. Depending on who passes, this test will be given a rating: low, medium, high. He asks everyone to raise their heads and look at his blue-colored belt, which signifies high rank. He informs that all those who reach high rank and show their achievements will have the worm extracted and their merit will be recognized by the top. Among all of them, only Su understands the true meaning of these words, because now the idea of becoming a high rank holder has become the goal of life for everyone. At the point he interrupts his speech, the captain pulls out a red piece of bamboo and reminds him that he asked him not to make a scene. The red bamboo gives Sao a small shock, and the bamboo itself turns out to be a whistle, thanks to which the captain creates several signals. Hearing just a little bit of this whistle, Su immediately covers his ears, and his brother standing next to him does not understand this strange reaction. It's just a normal whistle, not very loud. But in just a second, everyone around them starts screaming in pain and shivering because the sound of whistling causes the worm inside them to become restless. Su also fell down as if squirming in pain, but he had no feelings at all, which surprised him greatly. The captain continued his speech. He said that only 2 or 3 of everyone would be able to reach such a rank, and everyone else would have to live with a worm inside for the rest of their lives. The captain also shouted for everyone to get up, for it was long past time to start. Sao is increasingly suspicious that the worm isn't in his chest. Sodan says that maybe he didn't feel it because he covered his ears, but Sao denies it, saying that even that doesn't help against the worm. So's brother's sharp voice interrupts his thoughts, his brother communicating his determination to become stronger than So. He talks about how he possesses Dantian, unlike Sao, and that's what will help him become better and stronger than his brother. After also states that upon reaching high rank and extracting the worm, he will take revenge on his brother Su, though the latter in turn doesn't understand what he can be avenged for. Without waiting for an answer from Su, his brother raises his hand and asks the captain if he can be the first to start taking the test. So Dan informs our hero that this was most likely due to his brother thinking that Su really was a spy for the blood cult all along, and didn't tell him about it before. His brother starts showing off, yelling that he doesn't need Su's help, and runs ahead of everyone to take the test. But just a second after that, he gets punched in the face by the captain for being amateurish, causing him to fall to the floor. The captain scolded him, and the order to get back in formation and is there, and to act only as ordered. So in turn repeats 3 times, "So true, sir," and then bows. The captain approaches So and orders him to be the first to take the test. Su is surprised by this, though he expected the possible. He still hoped it wouldn't happen. The captain immediately starts mocking Su and mentions that a real blood heir wouldn't have such problems and shock. So in turn continues to lie, saying he is very grateful for the opportunity. So heads to the cave. He remembers this test, for he has taken it before, but under a different captain. Here Sodan appears, once again reminding him that Su has no Dantian and asking him what rank he got in his past life. The answer was the expected, low. So also adds that low rank is used as meat or all sorts of non-serious missions. A man in a robe and carrying a sword, who looks like a cult member, appears out of the shadows of the caves and immediately starts the dialogue by asking if this is Sao. This surprises So a lot, but even more surprising is the man's voice. He knows him. It turns out to be Commander Su in a past life. At such news, even Sodan was shocked. Saung-gu, the past commander of So, the commander of the Black Wolf Squad, began to appear from the shadows. So is surprised by Captain O's cunning plan, but does not lose his head, because he managed to fool even the 4th star, and here is an ordinary captain. Su responds to Sung-gu by saying that it's exactly him, and he's heard a lot about the captain of the Blood Wolves from his grandfather. However, Sung-gu interrupts him, calling his words a lie, causing Sao to be a little shocked. Sung-gu also talks about how the Blood Wolf Squad has never had someone who looks like his grandfather's description. He asks to be told who Sao is really. Sung-gu immediately grabbed So by the neck and squeezed tightly asked another question. Did So crave for Sung-gu's death? Sung-gu continues to squeeze So's neck and talk about how he has been training in Black Wolves since he was very young and knows all of his father's subordinates by heart. Hence, So's grandfather could not have been among them. Sao resists Sodan's suggestions to pull out her sword, but in the moment, she yells out that Sung-gu is going to attack from below. Here already our hero did not tolerate such treatment and picked up his sword, reflecting the lower attack into his body. But even this does not save the situation much, because the body of our hero still continues to hurt. Before he can stop the attack, he gets another kick right in the stomach from Sung-gu's leg. From such a blow, Su flies off into the wall and the pain goes all over his body. He remembers his commander who was ruthless all his life. As the memories swirl around in his head, Sodan once again shouts out that Sung-gu is coming with another blow. Another punch moves in. Su is having a hard time fending off the attacks. He's hit the back of his head and his head is spinning. At Sodan's command, he fends off the blow from his side, though he finds it very difficult to hold back such a torrent of power still in this state. After So held back the attack, he collapsed to the floor, and the captain immediately pounced on him, becoming a boot on his body, preventing him from getting up. But that wasn't the problem. It was the fact that So's sword was a couple meters away from him. The captain immediately began asking Su to tell him how he got so much information about him and the cult. Su saw this as a chance to bring Sung-gu into the dialogue, and immediately asked if he was the one who wanted to find his little sister. However, this only surprised the captain a little, In his opinion, Su was still a scout who had managed to gather too much information. The captain said he was surprised at such knowledge, but Su interrupted him by saying that Sewa, the captain's sister, was alive, and that he had seen a moulage corpse that day of their father's murder. So offers to talk more about it, and the captain in turn is greatly surprised that he knows her name. He thrusts his sword into the ground and decides that Su is not bluffing and may indeed be the blood heir. The captain agrees to listen to Sao, and after he tells him what to do with him, but he starts by asking where Sewa is now. To this question, our hero immediately replies that Sewa is now in the Colored Moon Association. The commander begins to suspect that the first blood star is behind his father's death, for it is the one that belongs to the Color Moon Association. Sao confirms the captain's speculation, saying that the first blood star is the one who wanted to ignite the fire of hatred in Sungu's heart and control the Black Wolf Squad. However, Sungu is slow to agree. He calls it absurd because the wounds on his father's body were inflicted by people from orthodox sects. Sao notices Sungu's excitement and asks if he has seen these people with his own eyes. Sungu doesn't know what to answer. His thoughts and emotions are overwhelming. At this moment, Su decides to finish him off with information. He gives the exact location of Sister Sungu's whereabouts, down to the locality, thus dispelling the captain's doubts. Su doesn't know what to add anymore, but it's not required, because Sungu believed him and only asked who he was. They agree that this is true, however. The captain warns that if it all turns out to be a lie, he will find Soe anywhere on the planet and cut off his head. They shook hands, and Sao wished the captain would find his sister sooner. Sungu also added that he still can't trust Sao completely, but if it turns out to be true, he will be his benefactor for life. After shaking hands, Su notices a plaque in his hand that reads, "Medium Rank." Sunga also mentioned that the middle rank was earned for being able to block the captain's attacks twice. The contract didn't play a role here. Sungu decided to clarify where Su had heard of him, to which he received an answer from his grandfather, although the captain didn't believe the answer much. This time he pretended to believe it. The captain appeared to be very attentive. He noticed that when he asked Su for an answer, he answered everything but his grandfather's name. Sungu says he doesn't know what Su is up to, but this time he believes him and lets him go. Right after their dialogue ended, Sedan appeared and immediately said that she was preparing for Su's death because she thought that after he dropped the sword, the end would come. Immediately after Su stepped away, the captain began to analyze their fight, thinking about how he had blocked his attacks and overall how weird he was. The captain picked up on the fact that he was rather slow, but was quick to notice the strikes. Sungu had the impression as if someone was prompting him. Going back to the street, we are met again by the well-known Commander O, who is in full command and asks to become everyone by ranks. We can also immediately see the shocked face of Su's brother, who doesn't understand how Su managed to get such a rank when he doesn't even have a dantian. The tired Su grinned a little at his brother, but it was Sodan who laughed the most. She was generally able to laugh and cry for no reason. Walking back from the mountains, they continued to discuss Su and his brother, as well as getting a middle rank. The most pissed off of all was Captain O, who was looking back and forth the entire way, glancing at Su, probably also resentful and not understanding how Su had gotten such a high rank. So himself suggests that his annoyance is due to the fact that he now has nothing to pick on, since the Black Wolf commander himself has endorsed So. Though along the way, Sodan still reminds him that Sao farted right in that captain's face. Sodan decided to ask what Su was going to do now. His answer was interesting, for he had decided to find a way to restore the Dantian. So tells Sodan about the existence of a magical healer who cures any ailment, which is exactly what Sao expects to use. However, Sodan doesn't understand anything about it, and inquiring further learns from Sao that he is a very clever doctor, who according to many rumors is able to heal absolutely anything. Su also added that he was able to cure everything, but at a price, because in his past life he was told that this doctor was able to restore someone's dantian. A surprised Sodan also adds that Su has no money at all, and nothing at all but clothes and a sword. Without waiting for his response, Sodan decides that he has decided to sell her and starts beating him with his fists, trying to explain her importance and need. However, Su hurries to debunk Sodan's concoction and reveals that he's going to find some valuable plant and pay them to cure the Dantian. Their conversation and walk is interrupted by the loud voice of the captain asking everyone to stop. In front of the captain's face were several corpses of low-ranked cultivators who were lying in blood on the ground. Commander O notices an unknown man of strange appearance and clothing. He is in the business of strangling people. His face is covered with a black beard, and the commander behind him doesn't embarrass him at all. But just now he heard the question, "Who are you?" which was addressed clearly to this unknown person. The man kills another cultist, after which the captain lays his hand on his sword, gets into a stance, and yells for everyone to stand back. But a second later, this unknown man's hand grabbed the captain's arm, blocking the blow and telling the captain to get off and stay out of the way. With a single blow of his bare fist, he sends the captain into a knockout, and he falls to the ground. So is as shocked as everyone else, because just now the first-class captain was put on the ground with one punch by some weirdo, and the most stressful thing is that in his previous life, So had never heard of a martial artist like this man. With one clap of his hands, he created a huge wind pressure that blew everything around and also caused a sound that annoyed everyone. This time it worked even on Su. After that, the unknown man began to wonder that everyone around him was worthless, and also shouting so much. Sodan tries to talk to Su, but his ears are very sore after hearing such sounds, making dialogue very problematic. Su's ears are bleeding, and the dream says that the pain in his ears is so bad that he's about to vomit from it. But at this moment, Su feels the aura of blue fire appearing again, this heaven in the area of his heart. After this, the ringing in his ears ceased and his wounds returned to normal, but no sooner had he rejoiced than he saw the scene of one of his brothers protecting the other, who was lying unconscious on the floor and protecting him from this stranger. Seeing that Javibak remained standing on his feet after the clap, this stranger decided to make him happy by telling him that he had passed. But immediately a second after his words, he slammed his fist into Javibak's head, sending him face first into the asphalt. Immediately after, the strong stranger notices our hero Soun, who is also on his feet, but Soun makes the decision to run with all his might. But just an instant was enough for this stranger to be behind Su's back, with his leg raised above Su's head. The commander and teacher arrived at the same place. Seeing Captain O unconscious, they set about waking him up, which was successful. The teacher of the cadets immediately noticed that most of his students were either wounded or dead, to the point Captain O apologized, for a certain barbarian had done it all. Immediately afterwards, the captain began to apologize, for the unknown man had managed to knock him out with a single blow and then began to describe his appearance. Upon hearing the description of appearance, the teacher immediately felt tense and a little shocked, and even queried about the appearance and clothing. After describing the appearance, the teacher asked if he knew who Hayashon was. Hearing that name, the captain also got a shock. The teacher narrated that the captain had not seen his appearance before, but it was one of the 4 honorary blood cultists. Meanwhile, after being kicked by Akon, one of the 4 honored Su regains consciousness at an unknown location and sees Akon himself in front of him. Akon immediately called Su a brat, but he is shocked and can't believe that someone like him not only withstood such an attack, but was the very first to regain consciousness. Akon held Su's sword in his hands and added that things were about to get very interesting with everything. The teacher and Captain O are already rushing to the mountain where Akon and the others are. The captain is still apologizing, however the teacher assures him that there is nothing he could have done to one of the oldest. They also discuss whether the cadets are alive, for Captain O has hope for the twin So brothers. He would like them to survive, for such people are rare to find. The teacher asks the captain to be restrained, as even among the elders this man is the most eccentric and unpredictable. When they arrive at the mountain, They speak special words and worship the blood demon in order to be allowed to pass on. Immediately after opening access to the cave, a bolt of white energy lightning flew into the teacher, which he managed to stop. Akon immediately asks the reason why Captain O and the teacher showed up. He assumes it's because of the children he interrupted and took some of them to his lair. With one question, he throws one teacher into a sweat, asking if the teacher is afraid he will harm the children. Akon talks about how he's not going to hurt them. He wants to teach them a couple moves while they're here. The teacher immediately asks if the elder is going to take on a couple students, to which he receives a refusal, for Akon is just going to smooth out his loneliness. But Captain O has a misunderstanding in his mind. He thinks that Akon is lying and is actually going to take them on as apprentices, contrary to what he said earlier. Captain O also understands the power and skill of Akon, for it can be life-changing to become the apprentice of a martial arts master, Dak, and another of the elders. Captain O abruptly begins to speak, and kneeling down asks the elder to point out that one of them has a damaged dantian and cannot practice with such a professional. One spit bone from Akon in the captain's face was enough to send him flying down the mountain. Akon doesn't understand why the captain started giving his opinion when he had already made up his mind that he would train them. At Akon's orders, the teacher also leaves, but regrets that he may lose children with such potential. Immediately after the teacher and the others left, Akon requested that Su go and get some food for him. But to Sao, this request seemed very foolish, for where would he get food? Clutching Saun's sword in his hands, he turns to Saun himself and tells him not to even think about running away, because he will have to prepare for the worst if he tries to escape. Even though Akon warned him not to run away, So still thinks about running away. Sao also decided to ask for his sword back, reasoning that it would be easier and better for him to get food that way. Without waiting for an answer, and without telling him that it was a memory of his mother, he snapped that sword hilt into his face. Akon immediately returned the sword. He was referring to the fact that such a weak and short sword he didn't need it at all. Immediately upon returning the sword, Sudan began to complain, for during the time Sudan had been sleeping, he had even managed to pick his teeth with it. But while she was complaining, Akon had already approached the twin brothers. After throwing a couple punches to their faces, he grabs both twin brothers and takes them with him. He took the twin brothers before he left, and later jumped off the mountain in one leap. But that's not even what surprises Su all that much. It's where he is. So is at the top of a huge mountain and has no idea how to climb down it, much less get meat or any other food. All the while, Su is in shock at the tasks ahead, and meanwhile, Sodan watches Akon jump straight through the air in huge leaps. In an attempt to get down, So grabs onto a rock cliff to climb down, but the rock breaks off and he and Sodan fly straight down. But about halfway down the flight, he manages to grab onto a branch growing out of the cliff. Sodan tries his best to help him and at least cheer him up, always teasing him about how this way he at least got down quickly. After 4 hours of unrestrained paddling on the branch, Akon returns and sees his new apprentice hasn't even begun to search for food. After a while, Axiona taught them how to descend, and so even got a bow and arrow, and now going for food was more than feasible, unlike his first weathering. So had been at Akshan's house for 2 months now, during which time he had been beaten dozens of times, but he had also been taught a lot, and he was getting used to this way of life. Sao's regular foray for food is interrupted by Akon, who arrives simply by falling from the sky. He complains that his stomach is empty and it's long past lunchtime, and just by his menacing appearance alone he gives the impression that he's ready to devour the entire forest. So in turn presents him with a fried rabbit, the 3 he managed to catch today. However, Akon informs him that there are 4 mouths to feed and 3 rabbits, so with a massive fist bump, he reduces the amount of food intake for the day, depriving Sao of it. Today, Su will spend the rest of the day suspended above the abyss, as he failed to get the right amount of food today. Every day of So's new life is like this. He simply leads a slave lifestyle. For example, it takes him half a day to climb up and down a mountain. After 2 months of such an interesting life, my body had changed. Akon also noticed it, so Juabek became the new person in charge of collecting food. Though the latter tried to object to such a change in the system of their lives, Akon would not even listen closely, and immediately sent him to rest with his foot in his face. Immediately after Akon sent Juabek to rest, he grabbed Sao by the shoulder and jumped out of their den in the cave straight down the cliff. And a second after that, he sent Sao flying with a downward throw, sending him swimming with the fish. Barely surviving without air underwater, he surfaced and immediately questioned what Akon had done that for and threw him in the water. Akon informed him that they were on their way to see the man who would become So's mentor, but they needed to arrive there in normal form, which was why Akon had sent him to bathe. After a minute of bathing, Akon immediately told Su to get out, which made Sodan displeased, because now it was clear to her why Su was always stinking. Once behind the waterfall, Sao and Sodan discovered a trail that leads to an unknown destination. As Sao and Sodan, along with Akon, stomped down this path, they pondered who the mentor was. The most possible option they came to was an old friend of Akon's who could potentially exist and be the same. However, their dialogue was interrupted by Akon himself, who said that they had arrived, and the future mentor was already in front of them, and indeed there was a silhouette of an unknown man in the shadows. Immediately afterward, Akon asked to greet and bow before his future mentor. Su immediately kneeled down and bowed to the mentor, naming his rank and who he was, but Sodan told him that this mentor would most likely not be able to answer him. A skeleton in a robe with a sword appeared in front of them, which surprised both So and Sodan, but not Akon, who could not be surprised by anything. However, he didn't explain what was even going on. He explained to Su that all the physical training for those 2 months had been done in order to start learning martial arts. But Su interrupted him, as he immediately wanted to inform him that he was missing a dantian. However, this only made Akon laugh, for he had originally already known about it anyway. Akon shocked Su. After all, he had just said that it was possible to control internal energy without a dantian. His recovery now made no sense. This fact shocked Su very much, for he could not even imagine that such a thing would happen. Throughout his life, he had been tormented by it and heard ridicule, but now he had a new chance to gain power in his eyes. An alternative to it is an entity that will also allow the use of martial arts, Akon explained. Akon also narrated that if the dantian is destroyed, the essence will not help either, but it will allow it to be a vessel for your internal energy. According to Akon, Su is beginning to guess that the man wants to try and teach him how to control his internal energy, but it scares him. Moving closer to him, Akon touched his chest with his finger, indicating that this was where the energy cores were located in his body. According to Akon, it is also where the right energy is stored, and unlike the other energy, it is not accumulated but appears from birth, and it is rumored to be twice as strong as that used through the dantian. This news made Sodan madly happy, but Sao in turn was not in a hurry to rejoice. He knew that this energy was connected to his life, which made him afraid to use it. Standing directly in front of Akon, he proceeded to explain to Sodan that if he started using life energy, his lifespan would be shortened. Bowing to Akon, he sadly informs him that he cannot begin training in the use of life energy, and thanked him for what he has already done for him. Su tried to use the lie against Akon to avoid starting the training, however it didn't work. Akon figured out the lie and asked about it directly. He caught him by the neck and told him that he couldn't lie at all. Previously, such compliments hadn't been given to Su yet. Akon tensed up, and with a smile on his face, he gave Su a choice. Either he dies right now, because he would snap his neck, or he learns to use energy here and dies gradually. After this choice, Su bluntly said that it was better to kill him then in Akon's face. Those words put Akon in a bit of a stupor. He asked Sao, "Does he not care about his life? Or does he think someone will blame him for killing you?" Holding him by the neck, Akon continued to ask him questions, but Su's answers were simple. He didn't want everyone to use him throughout his life. Sao decided that sometimes it would be better to risk everything he had, lest he repeat the fate of his past life and turn out to be a third-rate spy. He decided that he would rather be killed by Akon now than die himself later, especially since he had a bloodworm in him anyway. However, it was the word bloodworm that interested Akon. After Akon let go of his neck, throwing him to the ground, but he immediately laughed at the words about the worm and asked Su not to make such stupid statements again. Akon checked Sun's body before taking it, and he's convinced there's no worm in it. However, while they were chatting near the skeleton in the robe, the hieroglyphics below appeared. Su began to be calm when Akon stopped holding his neck with his hand, for he was glad the worm wasn't in him. Now Akon decided that he would make an offer that would be harder for Su to refuse, and the offer itself would be far more interesting. He offered to turn a blind eye to the absence of the bloodworm in Su's body in exchange for him fighting his brothers, whom Akon would train in martial arts. This offer shocked Su and Sedan, for such an offer was clearly not what they were expecting. After arguing a bit, they accepted the bottom line that Su would stay here and try to learn to feel his inner core. After these cute dialogues with Akon, Sedan started to suspect that Akon liked Su and even got a little jealous, but Su diluted it all by saying that there was no point in him getting close to this old man Akon. Sedan and Su begin to decide where best to begin their training, noticing the skeleton in a robe behind them. Flying home, Akon reflected that he was very lucky to have such a student, for not only was he very strong in potential, but he was also smart. Meanwhile, Su and Sedan were busy reading the hieroglyphics that were written near the skeleton with the robe. After reading them, they learned that Su would be able to train without wasting life energy, because there was a way around this limitation. However, right at the end, where instructions on how to do this should have been written, the characters ended without revealing the main mystery. Sedan didn't lose hope. She scrolled through her memories and remembered one very interesting thing Akon had said. Hell, he's going to open my neck like he said earlier, that's all Su could remember. But Sedan apparently means something else entirely. Once again, after the first failed attempt, the second also went nowhere. This time, Su decided that Sedan could talk to skeletons and decided to learn the secret from him, but that too turned out to be a foolish conclusion. Sedan was referring to the sword that stands near the skeleton. She assumes Su can talk to it. Sedan began to explain that she didn't know how to bear swords and speak to them, but Su was a special person, and he might well be able to do it if he even tried. After that, Su himself, and was able to understand what Sedan meant. He remembered what Akon had said during the dialogue about the mind of the sword. While Su dreams and imagines gaining new power through it all, Sedan asks him for the 100th time to start talking already with the sword. He takes this sword in his hands and begins to bear it a little at a time. Immediately after that, an avatar appeared and grabbed Su's hand. It was an avatar of a cute guy with purple hair. Su himself was startled by such an abrupt appearance of such an avatar. However, the one had already heard of Su. Apparently, the sword avatar had heard everything around it all along. The sword avatar turned out to be quite polite. He immediately introduced himself. His name was Ho John D. He was the Iron Sword of the Southern Sky. This was the name his master had given him shortly before his death. Sedan was pleasantly surprised by this avatar. She obviously liked him, but Su was a bit apprehensive, for he knew a bit about this sword. Its wielder had turned an entire province upside down with just one sword. No wonder he was a friend of Akon. Su spoke more about this swordsman. He was part of the top martial artists, and once there was even a rumor that he would enter the top 6, but one day he just went missing. Only one thing is not clear: what kind of a powerful man like this swordsman died just like that question, just somewhere in a rock on a cliff. So immediately began to suspect that Akon might have killed him, but Sedan wasn't so sure about that. However, the avatar immediately dispelled all their theories, and guesses. According to him, it was someone else, because the owner of this sword Akon had never been able to defeat in the whole time. This was a great surprise to Su, after all. Akon is one of the 4 elders of the cult. Just how strong was this Southern Sky swordsman that even he couldn't defeat him? The Avatar promises he'll talk about it later, but right now he's willing to help them with the cause they spoke to the sword for. He's already aware of everything that's going on. It comes as a shock to Sue, because after a minute of dialogue, the sword avatar John declares that he knows the technique and is willing to help Sue learn it. Sudan was surprised to agree so quickly, but John stated that this agreement was due to the honor of the dead owner of this sword, which was why he had agreed so quickly. Avatar John informs him that if So doesn't learn the technique, it will tarnish his late owner's honor. He can't let that happen. John's personal desire also played a part. He wants his owner's techniques and knowledge to be passed on to the next generation, so prepare to help with that. So admires him. He calls him really cool. However, his thoughts are interrupted by John himself. John's abrupt request surprises So very much. He asks to take him under his ownership. After all, he is a sword first and foremost and needs an owner. He starts licking and begging to be picked up, because he hasn't had an owner in so many years, and he so wants to be petted in the evenings. Before he could finish, however, he caught his face a few flying fists from Sodan, asking him not to disgrace the other swords with his tactless behavior. Meanwhile, the Sao just stood there and watched the contest between the two living swords. So agrees to take him into his possession, however, if he stops acting like a pervert. Even though John was upset about it, he still agreed to everything and offered to go start learning the technique. John began his story by saying that there is a place of energy accumulation that is just below the stomach. In Sao's case, he said he needed to feel his energy in the heart area. However, Sue doesn't have much of an idea of exactly how he needs to feel yet. John begins to explain that his past owner believed that the awakening point for energy was the forehead. According to John, So should visualize this energy in front of him or summon his anger, thereby awakening it. According to John, the easiest time to feel and awaken energy is when life is in danger. So also continues by saying that if you feel a rush of new energy and bitterness in your chest, that is the awakening of the core energy. This shocks our hero, for he has had it before and more than once. After that, he immediately recalls that this old man of honor's training was done in such a way that his energy was awakened. Sodan also recalls that he trained the Su brothers in the same way. John clarified whether the Sao had experienced this feeling before, to which he obviously received confirmation of his speculation. John advises Sao to remember those situations and try to replay those emotions to reawaken the energy. John advises Sao to recreate in his head the situation of when he felt that awakening. So began to replay different moments of his life in his head to remember the feeling. From the day he entered the cult until today, he had often experienced such moments. It did help, the same aura that had appeared around him before, and his heart was once again covered in blue fire. Su immediately notices that this energy is familiar to him. He can feel it traveling through his body. Sodan also recalls that when he ate the worm and his webbing burst, he experienced the same thing he is experiencing now, and it healed him then. John is very surprised by this, as his past owner took a month to feel his inner energy, while Su only had 4 hours to do so. Sodan draws attention to the fact that Su has been reborn. She thinks it might have something to do with that. Next, John asks So to try to concentrate on the negative energy, it should be a little bit, about the size of a fingernail. John also advises to start by mastering cultivation techniques to increase the body's energy reserves. Both avatars ask Su to try and learn a new technique to help him repair his wounds, but there's a chance of losing something that confuses him a bit. Sao tries the punching technique. He coats his fist with that energy and swings with all his might. He manages to smash the wall with his fist. He's happy about it, and generally being able to use martial arts again. Both avatars are wildly surprised to see such rapid progress from Sao. John was especially surprised, for his past master, even after mastering the technique, had never gathered so much energy at once as Su managed to do. John praises him and informs him that with such progress, he will be able to master techniques from 10 years ago that are very powerful. So immediately wonders if he is definitely awake, for he is surprised by the power he has come to possess. He has the power he has longed for, and this is just the beginning of what he can learn. After a couple hours, the three of them all headed home to Akchon's den, but on the way home, Akchon himself jumps on Sao's head, who was heading back. Akona classically asks about whether Sao wanted to run away again, but Sao clarifies that he was just on his way home. Immediately afterward, he asked the far more important question of whether Sao had awakened the energy, to which he got a mixed answer, but Sao had more to do with the fact that he hadn't, which was in fact a lie. Now the dialogue they continued at home, however, Sao's black eye was added to it. Sodan immediately asked why Su wouldn't reveal the truth, to which he replied that the power couldn't be revealed so early in front of everyone. While Su was explaining to Sodan the reasons for his lie, Achan just sat there and listened to it. However, he then interrupted their dialogues by saying that he practically believed another of Sao's lies. Afterwards, Akchon said that So should take the topic of energy seriously, otherwise he would face a punishment, a very interesting one. He stated that in case Su didn't take it seriously, he would put him under the command of Captain O, the same one. Akchon narrated that after the day he took So and his brothers to his house, he was visited more than once by Captain O. According to Akchon, the latter came each time asking to take you into his submission, but Akchon didn't get much into his requests. This fact interested Su, for he didn't think that this stubborn captain was still following him. Akon threatens So that he can give this captain all the information, including about the worm. Akon also emphasizes that Su should show up and fight at full strength, only that way and no other way. However, Sao realizes that someone as strong in perspective as him will be very important, so he reminds him that Akchon threatened to kill him for losing. Now he's determined to find out what he'll get for winning and gaining advancements in energy development. As motivation to train Su, he promises to fulfill his every wish, whatever it may be. Right after that, Akchon threw a stack of books towards Su, and together with Sodan, they started to look at them. According to Akchon, there was the necessary information for mastering martial arts. Sodan immediately points out that the twin Sao brothers have been trained in the same techniques from the books. Most likely Akchon wants to make the most equal fight possible for them. However, among the books, Sodan also notices a book with techniques for that very sword avatar John. This surprises Sodan and So, for they are holding a book with the techniques of the southern swordmaster himself. Sodan immediately wonders where he got such books from, and Sao in turn makes ingenious theories that he searched the corpse of the southern master after his death. But while they were discussing the southern master's corpse, Akchon was angry that Su was too little pleased with what he had given him. However, even without looking, So dares to question how Akchon got such valuable records. This question extinguished all of Akchon's emotions. He dryly replied about a certain someone handing them over to him after the death of the South Wind Master. However, John disputes this, saying that Akchon once tried to use the Shining Star technique to defeat his past master. Sodan is surprised. She didn't think the old man wanted to defeat the past master John so badly. In John's opinion, Akchon himself used techniques from the Southern Master's books to improve his fighting skills. Also, according to John, the fight against will happen when they get a level of advanced martial arts. Akchon stops liking Sodan. She begins to think of him as somehow dishonest, and she stops understanding the motives behind his actions. Su also begins to realize that Akchon wanted to have an even battle, and as it turns out, that's not the case at all. John is certain that Akchon failed to settle a score with his past deceased owner while he was alive, so he will try to do so by getting revenge on the sword at the hands of Su. But this is just John's speculation about Akchon's true motives in this battle between Su and his twin brothers. Sodan immediately suggests using her as well, not just the South Wind Sword, but Sao immediately realizes that Akchon probably won't allow that to happen so as not to break the balance. John immediately rushes to reassure Sao and tell him that many of the techniques created by his late owner are not fully perfected. John also said that all of his owner's techniques had flaws and weaknesses, as he once lost his notes and didn't have time to fully pump his skills. A couple days later, Su was already practicing in the forest, mastering the southern sword techniques a little at a time and noticing their disadvantages. However, the whole battle atmosphere was interrupted by Sudan. She wondered if the old man would realize that Su would use the improved versions. It might anger him after all. Su, Sudan, and John understand this. For someone who was only able to learn ordinary techniques, wouldn't be able to reach their perfect level so quickly and improve even further. John didn't miss a moment and reminded him that the level of such techniques would be difficult for Su, as only a master like his past owner could do such a thing. But it made Su a little irritated. Sodan also reminds him that without perfect techniques, Su doesn't stand a chance, to which Su only smirks, saying that despite the old man's anger, he's still going to use them. However, the whole battle atmosphere is interrupted by the appearance of Captain O, who is not yet aware of Su, but has come to finish off Sao, as he puts it himself. Captain O has brought along a man who, according to the captain's own version, can replace So-wei, and the elder will refuse to train So but take this man. This man's name was Do-yun, and Captain O asked him to demonstrate his ability of the highest rank. So stepped out to meet them and at once saluted Captain O on behalf of the middle rank, according to the rules honorably. John isn't too enthusiastic about this appearance. He's surprised that such a captain has become a problem for Su, but according to Su, he's always trying to get what he wants, and is very pushy. So doesn't realize what kind of man is behind Captain O's back. He raises some concerns. Captain O took Sao by the shoulder, to which Sao only replied that he assumed that the man and Captain O had come to give a new shipment of supplies to Akon. At this moment, placing a hand on his shoulder, he was using chi energy to check on Su's alleged features, calling him indeed a good warrior, however, without a dantian. After that, Captain O pointed at the very same Do-hyun guy, saying that he would now serve the elder together with Su. The captain also said that he was puzzled by how Su managed to convince the captain of the Blood Wolves that his grandfather existed at all, because they had never even heard of it in Luoyang City, and according to Sao's version, his grandfather lived there. So was wary and surprised at Captain O's persistence, and he also remarked that if he had been so persistent in studying martial arts, he would have been very successful at it. So called it a misunderstanding, explaining that his grandfather had to go into hiding, which was why no one in town knew about him. And who would he reveal such a secret to but his grandson and other family members? However, Captain O was more surprised that Su called his man, Do-hyun, unsuitable to train with the elder. Captain O was very angry at what So had said and said things that he would regret saying. The captain then ordered Do-hyun to deal with So, and Captain O himself would take full responsibility in case anything happened. Do-hyun immediately says that he has nothing against Su, but opportunity is opportunity, and he'll take it, asking Su to bear with him if it hurts badly. This whole scene really surprises Su. He genuinely doesn't understand why the captain suddenly thinks Do-hyun is stronger than him. Do-hyun throws a straight punch aimed at the side of Su's head, but Su avoids the punch easily. This is hugely perplexing for Do-hyun, and even more so for Captain O, who didn't expect anywhere near this level of performance from So. Su also preceded that it was a top-rank basic technique in the blood cult that had the name Seven Fists. He also estimated Do-hyun's speed and strength to be close to perfect. Su was surprised that having mastered only the second level of the Shining Star technique was enough for him to dodge a top-ranked attack with ease. However, the fight got a climax, because a second after the blow, Akon appeared behind Do-hyun's back, who was very angry because someone dared to attack his student. Akon easily grabbed Do-hyun's head and squeezed it until it bled, so much so that he bent his neck with a single movement of his fingers. This came as a great shock to Sao himself as well, who had not expected such a harsh reaction from his teacher Akon. He did the same thing to Captain O immediately afterwards, not even recognizing him, for Akon asked who he was and why he had attacked his apprentice. Captain O began to explain who he was, but it didn't interest Akon much, for he didn't care who attacked his apprentice. Sodan had made a good point about the fact that Akon had easily eliminated 2 of the higher-ranked men, and in Sodan's opinion, even death training wouldn't bring Sao to that level of skill and strength, which he agreed with rather than argued with. That's when the So brothers showed up and took notice of Akon's new level of training. However, the brothers' dialogue was interrupted by the cries of Captain O, who begged for pity, for half-dead Dohyeon was lying bloody on the ground. All the captain had time to shout was that there was nothing known about Su, but even that wasn't a stop word for Akon, and he ignored the captain's words and punched him in the head with his fist. Only one blow made the captain feel almost dead, and some of his teeth crumbled instantly. Akon also talked about how he had told the captain more than once that his stories weren't interesting, and Akon didn't care about any of it as much as possible. But this was the first time that Akon noticed how much Sao was grating on this captain's nerves, so much so that he even found and brought in a replacement for Sao. So told Akon that he had killed 2 of his subordinates when he was kidnapped, a statement that shocked So's brothers behind him. Akon was not surprised, but he said it was their own fault because they were so weak that they had been killed by Su without a dantian, and by the laws of nature, the weak die first. After his words, Akon ordered Captain O to be picked up unconscious and thrown down the cliff, which sent Sao and his brothers into shock. However, to their surprises, Akon only suggested that he take care of it himself, immediately after which the Su brothers busied themselves with the descent of Captain O. So was surprised that afterward, Akon called the situation unpleasant, and the captain himself a stray dog. After that, Akon also added that Sao was unlucky, because such stray dogs, if once hooked, will stick around for a very long time. Without answering anything, Sao offered to help his brother carry Captain O downstairs if he got tired. Drawback agreed, but immediately afterward he ran sharply down the cliff straight ahead, shouting to Sao to catch up. But So himself did not much understand the motive for such actions. When Sodan saw how Sao's brother moved, he offered to teach him movement techniques, an idea Sao liked very much, as it would help him to move around the area. Immediately after his decision, Su asks Avatar John to teach him these southern sword techniques, with which he can reduce his body weight and become more winded. John immediately grabbed hold of So's hand and lounged against it. While talking about how the past owner of the sword had been surprised by such techniques, he thought So would definitely like it. Only Sodan didn't like everything, who was already sick of John's perverted behavior. Finishing his dialogues, Su headed downstairs to his brother, and the latter had already brought Captain O downstairs by this point, though he was quite tired. Drawback decides to leave him halfway, and afterward contemplates killing Captain O. Drawback was glad to see Sao come in, and immediately told him about already stretching his arms to unleash his anger on Captain O. Still, as Drawback says, Akon meant to finish that captain off. So bared his blade to let his brother know that Captain O was not to be killed, and Akon didn't mean exactly that. However, while they were wasting time dialoguing, Captain O came to his senses and immediately jumped away from them. This gave Su a shock, for he thought that his brother had blocked all of his recovery points. The captain managed to hear part of their dialogue, and his anger at both of them, especially Su, became very huge, because those wanted to kill him. He decides to show them all his power. Captain O circles around Sao, trying to take Sao into the ring. However, the latter does the same, and John from behind Sao picks up on the fact that Captain O has no idea at all about Sao's true abilities. Jumped up, Captain O swoops down on So, paralleling the fact that someone weak like So without a dantian wouldn't be able to overpower him. Su manages to block the attack with his energy, preventing Captain O from attacking him. This causes an indescribable shock to the captain, because it's been a long time since anyone could stop his attacks, much less a brat like Su, in his opinion. Just a second later, after blocking Captain O's own attack, Su strikes him with a wave of his sword, concentrating his energy. This causes a huge shock to the captain, and also a huge pain. The blow went very hard, yes, so much so that from behind the captain's mouth came blood. Su observes his strike very well. He shares with John and Sodan the fact that he used the energy he charged his sword with for this strike. However, John, who has seen many attacks in his life, such a simple strike would not surprise him. He just soa to keep his guard up. John talks about being a top-notch martial artist and captain against So, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that the fight is now just about to enter its active phase. It comes as a surprise to Captain O that Su is using internal energy, because when he came in, putting his hand on Su's shoulder, he checked to see if he had energy, and his technique showed nothing. However, at this time, Su doesn't lose his activity and leaps up and flies towards Captain O, swinging his sword. Using the wasp tumbling technique, the captain manages to evade another sword strike that was headed in his direction. Jumping back, the captain continues to watch as So launches attacks, and the captain's strength is only enough to dodge them a bit, and that with force. Captain O wonders how Su has so much power, because he doesn't even have a dantian like the others. This fact scares the captain. He realizes that in the future Su could be a huge danger. Amidst everything he sees, Captain O decides to kill Su right now here, lest he become potentially very powerful in the future, if even now he manages to parry the captain's attacks. At this moment, Brother Su began to watch the battle, for he had only just woken up after being blown away by the captain when he took off. However, the captain manages to land a blow on So, though not a very significant one, but John manages to start worrying. Brother So also enters the battle, kicking straight at the captain. After a punch from So's brother, the captain also takes a punch. However, Javbak doesn't do much to get upset, and So and Sodan stand back analyzing the situation. Jwabak only laughs off such a blow from the captain, calling it worthless, because according to Jwabak, it's nowhere near the elder punch he gets every day. Jwabak lashes out at the captain again and decides to take revenge on him for that moment of humiliation during the exam. However, the moment the captain uses a strange ability against him, he launches a huge stream of blood right into Jwabak's face. He thus deprives Jwabak of his sight for a while, and at that moment he himself charges the blow with his energy, creating a green aura around his fist. Sodan and Sao are amazed at how foolishly Jwabak has let himself get hurt and lost his sight, albeit temporarily. However, Su decides to take advantage of this situation. While the captain is distracted, he can afford to sneak behind his back or strike from the side. Sodan carries out his plan and sneaks behind the captain's back to strike while he's busy with his brother. Though the captain manages to turn around, it doesn't save him from his fate, as Su's sword manages to end up right in the captain's body. Su had hoped that this blow would be fatal to the captain, but the latter in turn, though hurt, did not die. Even though Captain O manages to stop the blow, part of the sword renders inside his body, causing blood to pour all over his clothes, and with his other hand, he manages to grab Su's hand that is holding the sword. However, Su is not so easy either. With his second hand, he manages to pull out his first sword and asks Sodan to begin his actions. Stabbing his sword into Captain O's body, Su decides to use the technique of 8 lightning-fast strikes. However, this also fails. Releasing the sword in his body with one hand, the captain blocks with his fingers the blow Su tried to deliver, only slightly injuring the captain's fingers. The blow can be considered a failure. Sao was shocked by this, as he didn't think that the captain had so much energy to block all the attacks. However, Su also realizes that he has only reached the second level of techniques, and that might not be enough to overpower someone like the captain. Captain O begins to sneer at Su, saying that he's run out of tricks and can't do anything against Captain O anymore. The captain once again converges in a skirmish with Su, and Sodan asks Su to grab his sword and try to strike again to win. However, this is all interrupted by Sao's brother, who with his jumping foot smashes the captain's face to a bloody pulp, thus possibly saving his brother from a terrible fate. However, things get much cooler as So manages to put the sword of Sodan's avatar in the way, and with his foot, Jwabek not only struck, but also put his sword in the way and cut through the captain's arm and head. So John and the others rejoice in the victory, and also realize that they won with the strong help of Jwabek. If not for him, the outcome of the battle would have been with everything else, and very even sad, because one-on-one So would hardly be able to defeat an opponent of this level. Drawback himself feels anger instead of joy. He doesn't like the fact that this Captain O managed to spit blood in his face during their battle. Su is shocked that Drawback isn't at all concerned about defeating a top-notch martial artist and captain. He's more interested in the fact that Su now owes him his life. Drawback hears that he will soon have to fight So. He asks So himself about it, and is told that luckily, Drawback was able to defeat this captain, and he will now become his official apprentice. Drawback informs Sao that he should forget about any request to Akon, because in their future confrontation, his brother will clearly win, as he himself believes he will. So in turn decides to set an interesting condition. He offers the one who loses in a future fight to become a slave of the one who wins. Drawback in turn sort of agrees, but doesn't give a clear answer, and goes back upstairs, thanks to the tech. Even though he calls his brother a bastard, he's excited about the fact that he might have a chance to have two twins as his slaves in the long run. Immediately afterwards, Su summons John and clarifies if it's true that Akon has managed to perfect a much better moving technique than his last late owner had. John confirms that Akon is the best at this technique, and this motivates Su to start learning it, possibly leading to thoughts of surpassing Akon at it, thus surprising him. Drawback by this time had already made his way back to Akon and reported that his request had been complied with. However, Akon immediately grabbed his head and asked him where he had lost Sao on the way, to which Drawback replied that he was too slow and was weaving behind. Drawback also informed Akon that So had not learned any movement techniques at all, and as a result, would be on the ground in 35-40 minutes, despite his desire to hurry. But by the time he told him, Akon had managed to notice that Drawback was breathing strangely. He grabbed his head and immediately told him that he had internal injury, and after that, he asked the question, who really killed Captain O? With a smile on his face, Akon made it look like he believed it, saying that it must be Drawback and on him the decisive blow in this fight. By this point, Sao had arrived on the scene, and getting into the dialogue between Akon and his brother, he was asked by Akon if the captain had roughed him up. So's first words were the news that he had eliminated Captain O, as Mr. Akon had requested. Hearing this, Akon squeezed Drawback's head harder and informed him that the training time would be increased from now on. Afterward, Drawback started making excuses and saying that Sao was only helping him. However, Akon didn't believe it and launched Drawback into a flight into the wall. After hearing this, Akon told Sao to either continue the story or fail, but Sao decided to ask a question, because he was curious about Akon's wish if he defeated Beck. Su asked as a presentation if he defeated Beck to teach him the same movement techniques as Akon, which caused him to smirk a little. Though Su's request seemed brazen, yet Akon agreed to it, and promised to train him in his techniques if he won. So Dan took note of the fact that he agreed to such a thing rather quickly. Following this, Akon also added that Sao and the brothers have 3 months left, which is the time frame after which the fight will take place. However, Akon reminded that if he loses in front of his brothers, he will punish Su very severely, and asks him not to forget that. Su said he remembers that, and thanked him. He said that So could adjourn, and the old man himself had yet to train with So's brothers. So himself thanked him for that, and in his thoughts he was already visualizing Akon teaching him his movement techniques. After a while, John and Su decided to discuss the situation a bit during Su's morning bath. John wondered what kind of feeling Su was getting when he used the second-level techniques. However, Su stated that Captain O had only defeated him due to luck and good fortune. He also added that it is likely that the first attack was so light due to the fact that Akon managed to inflict minor injuries on the captain. John's response to this is that his past deceased owner would have killed this captain with a single blow. As his skill and technique was superior, Su is once again surprised that John is comparing him to the past owner of the sword. So Dan's positive attitude saves the whole dialogue. She cheers him up and tells him that now he can concentrate on training. Su moves on to training, for after seeing his brother's abilities in his fight with Captain O, he realized that he should train even harder in order to definitely win and gain access to training and movement techniques from Akon. However, today he is still practicing with sword movements. According to John, it will make a lot of things easier, and by pumping this skill, he will be able to use the sword like a toy. Meanwhile, Akon trains with his brother So, pumping up his skills for the upcoming fight. Akon complains that Baek can't fight properly, even though Akon himself personally showed him the shining star technique. Baek himself tries to justify that his fight with Su, who he considers a strong foe under Akon, is why he needs this kind of training. However, Akon doesn't want to hear anything and hits Baek over the head with a stick to get him to stop talking nonsense and start practicing. Akon starts telling Baek that Sao is learning everything on his own thanks to a couple of books, and based on that, he manages to outclass Baek and get out of the fight with the captain without getting hurt. However, Baek wants to answer the old man by talking about what he himself has personally witnessed about Sao being injured in battle. Akon immediately tells Baek that he has a knack for seeing serious injuries, and after returning from the fight, Su didn't have any. Akon tells Baek that because of his pride, he can't reach Su's power, and when fighting the captain, he should have watched his brother's actions more closely to get the same skill level as him. Akon continues to berate him, saying that he failed to seize such an opportunity that he had prepared for him on a platter and presented to him. The humiliations and remarks that Akon directs towards Baek increasingly motivate him to defeat his brother So to prove his strength, as well as fulfill that promise he made to himself in the exam. Akon is surprised that Baek asks him afterwards to show him the technique again and teach him, since Akon has beaten him so many times during training, but Baek is not going to give up, even though he is lazy. Baek is motivated to the max and talks about how all this punching and beating from Akon is just part of his training. He's Sanja Baek, and he's going to defeat Soil Loyal. Even though Baek's speech was to Akon's liking, he struck out at him right during that speech without listening to the end. Akon informs him that if Baek is determined to prove his intentions, he should do so with actions, not words, which causes Baek to already have some emotions. Akon says that he will now begin teaching Baek the very technique, much to Baek's surprise, as it's a signal to him that Baek has been accepted as Akon's apprentice. However, right as they were talking, the teacher of a squad of newcomers from the blood cult appeared and turned to Akon and gave praise to the blood cult and the blood demon. The teacher came to inquire about the cadet and Captain O who came to this mountain today. However, without listening to them, Akon says that he doesn't even know who they are and asks the teacher to get the hell out of here. The teacher continues his speech and says that his friend Captain O had told him today that he would visit Akon on his mountain along with a cadet. However, here Akon raises his entire aura, and in a beautiful strut, he addresses the teacher asking why he is bothering him about some ordinary captain's business. 3 months had passed since this dialogue. During all this time, Akon and Sao's brothers had been practicing, as Sao himself, winter had already arrived, and he often practiced by cutting with his knife the huge blocks of ice that fell on him from above when he was training near the waterfall. Even after all this time, John makes frequent remarks to Sao, saying that he still makes mistakes and his posture isn't always straight, but Sodan encourages Sao, saying that these are small things. However, Su interrupts their argument and tells them that it is time to advance to the battlefield and begin battles against his brothers for the valuable prize of training with Akon on the art of movement techniques. On the way to the battle site, Su asks John what level of sword techniques he is at now, to which he gets an honest answer that the level is still low and insufficient. He reports that Su has only curbed half of the techniques that his past late owner South Wind possessed. However, he also added that the result is incredible in such a small amount of time. After all, it has only been 3 months. However, Sodan is not satisfied with listening and thanking only John. She also asks for thanks in her direction as well, which she receives after her request, even though it is rude in her opinion. Sodan also decides to remind Su that he doesn't even know how to use the Shining Star technique, which both surprises and saddens Su a bit. She also reminds him that she's the reason he won all the past fights, where he's killed 3 people already. This is when John intervenes in the dialogue, telling Sodan that this will only be a sparring session, not a fight to the death, to which he gets a response from Sodan that she knows that without him. So gags them both, and afterward asks John about whether he can win tonight, whether he has the skills and knowledge to win tonight. John talks about how Sue has perfectly learned a few techniques and perfected them. John advises him to focus on just those 3 instead of the myriad of other techniques he knows but hasn't perfected. Walking to the battle scene, Sue was clutching Sodan in his hands and kept chatting with John about his chances of victory, John assuring him that Sue is quite strong to defeat his brothers. Sue thanks Sodan and John for helping him with everything, and promises to do his best to defeat his brothers tonight. After a while, they arrive at the place, all around frozen, and only one Akon is sitting on a rock, meets our hero, and tells him that he somehow came a little early. Akon says that So already deserves credit for not running away, but then Akon wonders if So is ready for battle. Sue responds to this rather brutally, saying that he will only be able to answer this question after the battle is over. However, here Sodan asks our hero and John to pay attention to something ahead. Behind Akon's back, the Sue brothers appeared, one of whom had gone bald, and they both became much more pumped up and outwardly strong. This causes some embarrassment to So. He also talks about how he was calculating such a change after training with the old man. Immediately after that, Akon set the rules, and they were simple in his opinion. The first rule was that there was no surrender, and the second was that the fight would end when one side lost the ability to fight. He also says that deaths in battle are not forbidden, hence the fight will not be stopped on injury, which comes as something of a shock to our hero. Much to Sue's relief, it's not a 2 versus 1 fight. Against Sue will come out fighting Beck. However, in the meantime, Beck had managed to pump himself up, wearing huge metal gauntlets right up to his elbows, which already instilled fear in his opponent. Beck talks about how these gloves play a balancing act because it wouldn't be fair for Sue to fight with swords in his hands, and Beck with his bare hands. So then bare his sword and also learned from Beck that Akon himself had used these gloves in his youth. However, Sue still believes that even that isn't enough for a fight on equal footing, as Akon has trained Beck in quick movement techniques, which is a strong asset in this fight. However, it all just pissed Beck off because he thinks that he can easily defeat Sue himself, and all this is just childish babble. "Let's go," Beck shouted, which was tantamount to starting a fight, and right after that, Beck rushed to meet So. Sao said it was readable and decided to take advantage of being a swordsman and attack at long range before Beck could even run up close to him yet. Sao did as he intended. Right after that, he used his slashing tiger technique to attack Beck from a distance. However, Beck manages to get his arm up in time to stop a punch on a kick that comes in the direction of Sue. The fight was more like waving, and Akon watched it from the sidelines like 2 children waving their arms. However, the fact that Sue is using such strong sword techniques like the South Wind Master once did amazes Akon. He is glad that Sue is able to achieve such success in such a short period of time. Due to his speed, Beck manages to catch Sound's arm and hold it back, calling Sound a laughingstock and a lowlife of Luoyang. Following that, an attack poured into Sound with Beck's second hand with an iron gauntlet in hand. However, the attack doesn't go through and Sue manages to dodge it by lowering his body down. Right after he ducked, he went for a low kick and delivered a strike from the bottom with his knee right to Beck's jaw. With that, he sent Beck's head flying, at which point he also finished with a jump kick once more. Immediately after, Sue rejoiced that he was able to do this, for this way he was gaining distance for his sword attacks, which he badly needed. However, Beck began to sneer at Sue, saying that he was a worthless swordsman if he used his legs as weapons in battle, having 2 swords. However, So in turn praised Beck, saying that he has come to possess far more inner energy than he did in his last fight against Captain O. Beck immediately says that it's all thanks to hard training with Akon, but Sue immediately picks up on the fact that he can't lie at all. Su distracted a bit from the fight, for he recalls that in his past life 10 years from now, his brothers would become one of the strongest in the blood cult. Su began to talk to himself, and in the course of the mini dialogues, he realized that now he had to work as hard as he could to become very strong, because the blood cult would invest a lot in his brothers in the future to make them so strong. A second after that, Su strikes an impossible blow. In less than a second, it flies near his brother, cutting his shoulder in an instant, making a huge gash halfway down his body. In his last gasps, his brother screams that he didn't even get to see anything before he was slashed by Su's sword. Even though Akon sees it, his facial expression doesn't change, and Su is sure that it's just the feints. Internally, he's clearly surprised to see such a change in this fight. However, Su himself promises that it's not over yet. Beck recalls how around nightfall at the chipping, Akon was busy beating Beck over the head with a stick, explaining all the mistakes. Akon had explained to Beck earlier that he should use faster movements and shorten his distance when fighting a swordsman. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to defeat a swordsman with such strength. Akon always beat the bay with sticks to make him remember information better. It was only after tons of beatings from Akon that Bayek began to understand what his main mistakes were, and began to realize that Su, without a cool teacher, etc., but only with the help of books, was able to achieve such a high result and master techniques as good as a master. After recollecting and replaying all the memories from training with Akon in his head, Beck stood up again on his feet and told Su to attack him by extending his arms forward. Sodan and So are greatly surprised by the fact that Beck got up and was able to fight further, as he had previously cried from a single scratch, but now he shows such a level of resilience. John discusses with Sodan the fight between Beck and Su, and they come to the conclusion that Beck is a pretty solid opponent for Su, and now he should stick to the plan they made for different situations. Su and Beck continued their contest, locking blade and hand in battle for this long-awaited victory. Striking blow after blow, they were both fascinating in their strength and movements, not yielding to each other in every strike and every defense. Not for nothing are they students of Akon. Su decides to attack very hard. He begins to conduct a concentration of energy in his hand while holding the hilt of the sword in his hand. Seeing this in the sword lunge, Beck immediately concludes that this will be a shining star formation technique, which is quite strong and scares Beck. He turns out to be right, as our hero does exactly that, but Beck tries to stop even an attack of this level with his hands, also gathering energy. However, Su still manages to inflict some wounds on Beck's body, down on his arm, but from Beck's own words, the wounds aren't deep and minor, so he doesn't see it as a problem. Su also notices that Beck manages to see, recognize, and understand each of his attacks, making him block them with ease, and along with that, he uses the movement techniques Akon taught him. Sao again launches a sword attack towards Bayek. Bayek in turn identifies the attack as a rippling tiger. Beck knows a lot about this attack. He knows its weakness, because during this particular attack, sound opens up some available points where Beck is going to strike. However, the moment of impact, it turns out that Su had conjured up a completely different technique, thus catching Beck off guard. But even that didn't break Beck, barely, but he manages to stop an attack of even that level. Immediately after this attack, he decides to break the distance, as it's much nicer and better for Su. Thus his punches become stronger and longer, dealing more blow to Beck's body. The problem with the technique Su is about to use now is one. To use it, it is worth calculating the trajectory of the opponent correctly, otherwise the attack will fail completely. Just during this attack, Beck notices that Su has lost his balance, so Beck decides to immediately launch a counterattack. Flying over Beck like that, Su lands a jab that knocks Su out of concentration for a moment. Such good attacks and actions on Bayek's part makes So bewildered, but also understands, because now he knows what kind of attacks Bayek has information about, so it will be easier for him to counterattack. At this time, the avatars in the form of John and Sedan are watching the fight. John sees Beck's progress, but reminds Su that he is also very strong. and Sudan, as always, just shouts words of encouragement. The fire in So's heart and body was still actively burning, and not just any fire, but his energy that was healing all the wounds that Beck had managed to create during this battle. Su thinks his teacher Akon finds their fight amusing, as he watches the legendary sword of the South Wind fail against the fighter he trained. So is well aware that it's just useless for him to continue the same attacks, since he'll easily stop them, so Su decides to use other attacks to freak Beck out. Sao decides to use the advanced techniques of his sword. In a moment where Beck thought Su was using a technique he already knew and would now stop with ease, Su turned out to be not so simple, and right now he was using a technique many times stronger and more powerful, with a huge number of striking points.
It becomes very hard for Beck to make such a flurry of attacks, and some of them go at him over and over again.
This causes Akon to be surprised, and Bayek himself realizes that Sound's attack formation has changed drastically. He needs to urgently find a new approach to his actions, or he will die. Afterwards, So asks with a smirk if Akon liked his new attack. He was indeed very surprised by this outcome after all. It comes as a shock to Beck that So was able to perform such a drastic and powerful transformation right during their fight. He had never seen such a thing before. So gained a tremendous amount of strength and energy. Even his eyes began to beam a strong aura of his inner energy. Akon decides that sooner or later, Su will definitely use one of his old techniques. That's when he expects to strike the hardest. Beck waited for just such a moment, and he managed to do what he wanted. He punched right through the center of Su's body. However, Su easily stops the entire attack with his hand. It could be seen that he didn't even experience much tension this time. Immediately after that, Su uses his strong technique and thrusts dozens of forces of his energy directly into Beck's body. An important climax occurs at this point, as Bayek uses his new body form and also releases a lot of energy too, creating a danger to Su. As John reports, it is a full metal transformation technique that allows Beck to become many times stronger, a technique he was clearly taught by an elder. Beck himself states in a gruff voice that their fight will change drastically from this point on. Immediately after his statement, he is right in front of Su in a second and delivers a powerful punch with his fist right at Su. So manages to dodge the attack, but he gets a small scratch on his face, so dodging it was very difficult. Su notices that he is even stronger and faster than usual after changing into this form. He was already very fast before because he had knowledge of Akon's movement techniques, but in this form, it is even easier to move. Sao takes his stance, takes his sword higher, and decides that the fight has gotten too serious, and now he will have to expand his range of attacks and capabilities even more. Deciding to launch a tiger attack, Su's attempt fails, as Beck quickly reads it, and then delivers a punch from his fist right into Sao's body, sending him flying several meters away. Before he can even step back and realize what has happened, Su notices Beck's body already flying over him from the sky, ready to land right on top of him. It feels like Su is about to turn into one huge wet spot. With obviously less power, he uses the same strike that Akon used in their first encounter with Su. When Akchon's foot was behind Su's back, now our hero has to figure out what to do with this attack, or try to take it. Using his sword, he tries to block Akchon's leg, which was about to have the opportunity to turn him into a piece of meat on the pavement. At the same moment, Su manages to find a moment to counter-strike, and that's exactly what he does with a kick to Beck's body. He sends Beck flying a few meters away, but he manages to stop and get to his feet, which surprises Su. The new brown coating of Beck's body that he had acquired with this form was starting to give slack. Some pieces of it had fallen off, and he himself had stated that there wasn't much time left to use the form's techniques. In response to Su's counterattack, he also attacks, creating a huge storm and an aura of energy inflicting all around him. So ponders that it might be an illusion, and Bayek himself is too worried, but Su continues to launch attacks despite his thoughts. However, in the moment, Su notices that Bayek is behind his back, but by all appearances it's getting too late to do anything about it. But Su manages to do something, With his sword, he blocks Beck's back attack, thus saving his life and possible victory in this fight, for the attack Su was heading with was wildly charged. So begins to notice that Beck isn't quite right, and may be experiencing many problems in this form, and possibly critical consequences to his health. John informs So that things are starting to get very serious, and So realizes that he himself will not be able to hold back and parry Beck's attacks indefinitely. However, John interrupts Sao and speaks of the greatest danger to Beck, for it seems as if the uniform in which he fights is draining him very badly, and he himself is losing his mind. John tells me that he has seen this form at Akon's more than once in his life, but not once has he seen any part of it crumbled and the veins swollen so much. John concludes that this is a side effect caused by Beck's lack of true physical strength to use techniques of this level for so long. John ends on the fact that continuing to fight in this form of Beck could take his life. However, So finds one issue that prevents their problem from being solved. This problem becomes Su's lack of technique that could withstand such a frantic set of force. Sao realizes that it is very dangerous to continue at this pace because that fool Beck might just die, and Su will only continue to dodge all his attacks. In the moment when Su was looking for an attack to defeat and stop Beck, he noticed that Beck didn't have time to dodge one of the attacks, and it hurt Beck very badly. Being in a bloodied and horrified state, Beck decides to do damage just as himself, as Su is looking for a winning attack. Putting his hands and fingers forward, Su declares that he has found a way to stop Beck and defeat him. He grabs Beck's hand and wraps his arm around it with his own, crossing their fingers between them. This comes as a huge shock to both Beck and Akon, who had not at all expected this outcome at a time of such intense battle. Sodan is shocked. With Sao's actions, she doesn't understand if the swordsman can act so foolishly by getting close to Beck. However, John is beginning to realize what is going on. He's going to resolve the situation using a spirit duel, which is exactly how John describes it. But it's not to say that Sodan understands his intentions. John explains further, saying that Su is going to mix his internal energy with Bayek's aura and power, thus achieving the undoing of the technique Bayek is now under the power of. John also states that if Su didn't know the Shining Star technique, such actions would be tantamount to suicide for him. John's aura and Su's aura collide together. From body to body, they try to punch each other. Our hero creates a situation where the winner takes all. Sodan throws a panic attack, saying that in her opinion Beck's aura is superior to Sao's, thus destroying all of his efforts. However, her theory is smashed to the ground by John, who explains that this is not the case at all, because Sao cleverly distributes her energy throughout her body, releasing only a part of it, while Beck, in turn, does not hesitate to let it out of her body to the maximum in order to defeat Soe. For Sodan and John, their battle has become a real interesting spectacle. For at stake is not just Akon's wish fulfillment, but the whole story of the two brothers, and the tremendous effort they have expended over months and are now pouring into each other. But Sodan and John are confident that So will win. It's only after a while that you can see that Beck has indeed started to lose energy a lot, and his body shrivels and collapses, thus losing its massive form. However, the moment their fight is interrupted by an elder who burst into the duel to break up the two brothers' bout. Unhappy with this outcome, Su immediately tries to find out why it was Akon who decided to interfere in their battle and stop it in this way. After which, Akon asks with a smirk if this thanks them for him disconnecting them earlier than their energy drained itself completely. Akon continued his speech by stating that the bout would be cancelled as they both couldn't beat each other for a long time. Su is very surprised by this outcome because he didn't expect it to be like this, and he did his best to get the status of the winner in this fight. However, here comes an interesting question from Akon's side. He asks Sao why he didn't use the technique he gave him earlier in the recordings. Su's explanation is that the technique had a glitch, and he is too weak and inexperienced to use secret record-level techniques without experience previously in combat. However, Akon immediately asked who told Sao to do this, to which he received the answer that no one could penetrate these lands, Therefore, no one could do this except, of course, the two avatars who were already smiling quite a bit from behind, but Sao did not tell Akon about them. Akon turns to So and tells him not to get cocky as he can still see his weaknesses. But So realizes that the weaknesses the elder is talking about are the points he left out so he wouldn't give himself away. Sao also asks about the weaknesses of the Sword of the Southern Sky, but only gets the expected anger of Akon, as he doesn't like dialogue about the sword. So also tries to prove to Akon that he won after all, for Beck is still resting unconscious, but the old one doesn't want to hear anything to that effect. So doesn't give up trying to argue, however, and asks if Akon really thinks this fight is fair and just. So began to explain that all the cards in this fight were on Beck's side. He also pointed out that Akon had personally trained him and given him a gauntlet and elixir of restoration, while Su only had books and an old writing in the waterfall. So complains that he should die if he is defeated and unrecognized by Akon. He doesn't like being just a pawn to his teacher. However, this all only causes Akon to laugh. He laughs wildly at So's arguments and reasoning. He grabbed Beck and started questioning him about who gave him permission to use such techniques without Akon's own permission, because the form technique is very dangerous and serious. Akon also asked Beck what kind of strange elixir he had given him, but as it turned out, no one had given Beck any elixir, only Beck himself thought so. Akon explained that it was with everything not an elixir, but just a drink. Akon would not give them an elixir every night. He then turned to the drawn Su, who was in the paradigm. When he learned how much new information, he asked if Su knew why, in so many years, he had only taken these two as his disciples. It was because their bodies were perfect for performing the form technique. He explained that their bodies had a much higher blood circulation than normal people, making it faster and easier for them to restore their internal energy. Then he also added that it was wrong on Su's part to talk about weapons, because Beck only had gloves, while Su had two distinguished swords, which were better than any ordinary sword anyway. For the first time in a long time, John agrees with him, though he does so because of his high self-esteem. The elder then added that Su was right that the fight was unfair, as he had originally designed it so that Akon himself would win in the end. From the dialogues, Su concludes that they are only pawns of Akon, and he himself has decided to cancel the victory treaties since the fight is cancelled. At the end, however, he makes a present for Su and his brothers, as he gives them the status of his official students, which is a pleasant shock to them all. He decides that they do indeed have martial arts abilities, saying that someone like them could learn to fight with a bone. So and the others thank him, and Akon himself asks them not to die at least, but rather to become outstanding warriors. John talks about how it wouldn't have been possible without Sao's helpers and cool abilities, and Sodan also agrees, saying that without cool swords and the ability to talk to them, it wouldn't have worked. However, Su decides that since they have officially become Akon's apprentices, he has the rights to ask a rather harsh and cheeky question. He asks if Akon will now teach them his techniques. Akon says that he has said before that the technique of such a fast and powerful transformation is only available to twins because they have a very fast blood circulation. Akon also adds that he would rather not train Su in fighting techniques, but teach him how to better wield a sword and handle different sword techniques. Akon tells Su that he uses the techniques and sword of the legendary fighter of the South Wind, who was the only high and worthy opponent of Akon. Su knew this, of course, but for the truth of the picture, he made a surprised face. John doesn't realize this right away and thinks he forgot to tell Sao about it. However, Sodan clarifies that Sao is just lying to Akon. Sodan tells John to get used to it, because Sao's entire existence here is based on his endless lies. Akon tells Su that after the death of the Southern Swordmaster, he has become the one who knows the Shining Star technique best, and will help Su master it. Sao realizes that he doesn't really need Akon's help in this matter, since there is a sword avatar in the form of John, but afterwards Akon also adds that he will help restore Su's Dantian. John and Sedan don't strongly oppose Sao becoming Akon's apprentice, thanks to which Sao is left in no doubt. When Sao realizes that Sedan and Joe are okay with it, he decides to officially become Akon's apprentice and welcomes his teacher. However, that's when Beck shows up, asking what would happen to him and his twin brother in such a case. Akon talks about how he can't abandon those who have mastered his techniques, though he doesn't like the twin brothers much. As a consequence, the old man decides to continue training the twin brothers, which makes them very happy. Afterward, Beck also greets his new teacher and his twin brother repeats after him. So is also excited, calling his brothers his new comrades and newcomers in the business, as he was admitted a minute later than So. Beck excitedly asks Akon about making So in charge over him and his brother, to which elicits a smirk from Akon. In response to this, he only shouted all over the mountain, looking up to the heavens, that the man who looked like the master of the southern sky was now his apprentice. He called out for John Wei, the late owner of the South Wind Sword, to take a look at it all, and laughed. So is surprised that Akon considers this a victory, and John asks So to give up his teacher in the person of that silly old man Akon. Immediately afterward, Akon goes to the grave of the late master of the Southern Sword and asks the skeleton how he's doing. Akon looks at the skeleton of the master of the South Winds and rejoices that now this grave can leave him alone and not remind him of himself forever. However, one point still bothers John, and speaking, literally, to a corpse, he asks who killed a master like him, for he could not be defeated even by Akon himself. After a while, Sao decides to ask John himself who killed the past owner of his sword, and the latter decides to tell, starting his story by saying that one day his owner received a letter that contained an address and time, as well as half of a rose flower. John also talked about how his owner had been through thousands and hundreds of fights before this day with many victories, but on this day he was extremely excited, especially going into the fight. John also narrated that he did not know who the man was, but he remembered accurately and well that one of his eyes had a golden hue. This man looked to be about 26 years old, something in that neighborhood, but what was surprising was not that, but the fact that the fight was over in only 40 seconds. The best swordmaster of the Southern Sky, who deserved the status of a celestial, received a bloody defeat in just 40 seconds of combat. John said that this whole information he had, this whole story shocked Sedan, but So immediately found some not-so-well-connected points in it that he pointed out. So, looking at John, realizes one strong inconsistency in his story, but when So starts to talk about it, he himself shuts up abruptly and drops the subject, saying it's past everyone's bedtime. Eventually, the conversation ends on not the most pleasant note, and So himself, imitating sleep, reflects on John's words. Thinking to himself, Su notices that John has not explained at all how his master's body and sword got from that province to the cave in the Akon territories. So ponders that if the master of the South Wind died in that battle, how his body got into this cave, and the death itself was not so significant, because this event should have spread the news to several provinces at once. So also goes over their dialogue in his head, noticing that John said that this man led his master to his death. However, John did not say that he killed him. Su concludes that the South Wind Swordmaster was still alive after the battle and died later for other reasons. Continuing his speculation, Su decides that after such a strong battle, the master of the South Wind comes to this cave to recuperate after such a difficult battle. In the end, Sao concludes that it was when the South Wind Master was recovering that the one who killed him appeared, because it's very difficult to kill such a master, and it's much easier to do it in such a state. So ponders who it could have been, and comes to the conclusion that it could very well have been the same person who had injured him in the fight, but he didn't dismiss the possibility that a third person had done it either. Sao decides that after killing the master of the Southern Sky Sword, this person who killed him was the sole wielder of the Southern Sky Sword at that time. Su also thinks that the person who killed the master of the southern sky did not want his knowledge and techniques to be received by someone else, because he had no receiver, which is why the master's teeth, arms, and legs were broken on his corpse. So is impressed by his own speculation and begins to think about the main thing that caused such a huge amount of cruelty from anyone. Su decides that this man did all this to become the only person who knows the way to restore energy and get it, because that's what wasn't written near the Swordmaster's corpse. All these factors make Su very angry, because he sincerely does not understand why, but he realizes that if he had this knowledge in his hands, he would have long ago become very strong, dozens of times stronger than he is now. At that same moment, Soe realizes that if all his theories are correct, then John has had a very hard time watching it all happen and not being able to have an impact. So also recalls that in all conversations, John skirts the topic. Even the first time they met, he didn't go into all the aspects without saying anything specific. So decides to avoid discussing the topic with John, and also thinks that one day, the moment will come when John will tell him everything himself. However, Sedan he apparently told the truth at once, and it surprised her very much, though he did not reveal the identity of the murderer even to her. Sedan tries to support him, and talks about how it's good that he spoke up, because who else is he going to tell it to but her, since they're both swordsmen. Soden decides to support John and promises that he'll change topics if Sao suddenly wants to chat about it. However, John says that it won't be necessary. In his opinion, So noticed everything and drew conclusions because it was evident by his reaction. John talks about how this is probably the unique bond between the swordsman and the sword they've been through a lot with. Here, however, John has already pissed off Sodan, because she doesn't understand what John even knows about So, if at the time of their meeting, Sodan had already killed 3 people for So. Su lies in thought, pretending to sleep while listening to the 2 sword avatars quarrel. However, after a while, he hears Akon arrive and greets him, calling him master. But instead of greeting him, Akon delivers a blow to Sao's head, saying that he and his brothers are wimps who can't do anything. Su scatters his students into the walls and scolds, for he doesn't understand why they chose to lie down instead of celebrating. Akon brings a huge barrel of some kind of booze and talks about taking someone on as an apprentice for the first time, so he's going to celebrate. Axion talks about how no one is going to go to bed until they finish drinking this booze, of which there is a lot. All 3 of them are drooling, and Akon himself asks who wants to be the first and try the drinks. They begin to argue with each other, who will be the first to start drinking, and so actively that the whole forest heard about it. The morning of the next day after the feast, Sao goes outside from Akshan's shelter and notices the rather cold weather and admires the falling snow. However, he is interrupted by Beck, who complains with a huge bruise that he was beaten up by old man Akon after getting drunk himself. So also asks Beck why he addresses him informally, but this startles Beck, and shockingly he doesn't understand why So has chosen to feel in charge over him. Su reminds Beck of his promise and gives him 3 options to choose from: call him senior comrade, call him master, or fight him one more time. Beck complies, and bowing calls So his master, though he doesn't understand why he does this when he has more power than So himself. Sodan picks up on Bayek's stupidity, saying that he has no idea that Su is still holding back in his battles with him, but Su says that Bayek knows this, but is too arrogant to admit it. However, then Akon shows up and calls them lucky brats, and they both in turn hail him as their teacher. Akon grabs So by the scruff of the neck, and together with him, jumping off the cliff, goes off in an unknown direction. Sao doesn't realize how much longer Akon is going to carry him like this, however it looks pretty epic. So talks about being able to move around on his own, but Akon replies that at his speed, they'll age faster than they'll get to the Valley of the 6 Bloods. Akchon's words shock Su. He doesn't understand what valley we're talking about, but the events of the manga are already taking us there. In one of the buildings, there is a dialogue, an unknown gray-haired man in a white robe, and the teacher of a cadet from the blood cult. Their dialogue is interrupted, however, as the roof and half of the building shatters into splinters. and Akon appears in that debris along with Sao. Akon greets the old man in the white robe, calling him a divine healer. Akon points at Sao and asks the old man to heal him, but it's not that So himself doesn't understand anything. He can barely contain the huge urges of vomiting that come out of him as a consequence of going this way. However, an unidentifiable woman appears behind Akon, asking Akon and the others in a harsh voice to stop all of this. That woman turns out to be the 6th star of the blood cult, a blood witch, Han Baik Ha. She points at So and asks Akon what kind of child he is and why he's here with him, but So himself doesn't understand what's going on at all. So begins to bow, for he recognizes the 6th blood star, but his bowing is interrupted by Akon himself with a heel to the face. For in his opinion, his teachings should not behave like this in his presence. Akon replies to the 6th star that there is nothing wrong here, he just came to see the heavenly healer. A middle-aged man who introduced himself as a heavenly healer came out of the next room of the building and asked Akon if he wanted tea and if his bones were as strong as before. Akon refuses the tea, saying it's for nobles and he hasn't been one for a long time. With this response, he elicits laughter from Sodan and Sao, who don't even want to argue with this fact. So is surprised that this middle-aged man is a healer. He thinks the old grandfather in the white robe looks more like a healer. Akon immediately decides to cut to the chase, asking the healer to heal So's core energy, and in return, Akon promises to give the healer his nameplate, which he says could be very useful to him. However, the healer gives a refusal, thereby irritating and surprising Akon. The healer shows Akon dozens of different nameplates from very important people, So notices 4 nameplates among them, which belong to the killers of the Central Plain. So realizes that Akon's nameplate is nowhere near the nameplates of those who stand at an unattainable level of excellence and are the best in the business around the world. The healer also says that restoring the Dantian is not a matter of life and death, so it can wait a little longer. The healer says he can't remove himself from working with important personalities and take Akon's apprentice instead, especially when the issue isn't that big of a deal. However, Sao focuses more on the question of what shadow of a person is standing behind the healer, who it is, and who he is treating. Akon says that the healer's words about the matter of life and death made him laugh, because in case Su doesn't get stronger, which requires Dantian, Akon himself will kill Su out of pity over such a brat. Akon, clutching Sao's head, threatens the healer, for how can he call himself a doctor if he can't save So's life now? Akon also offers to crack So's skull, as he believes a healer of this level can mend even such wounds. However, this doesn't surprise the healer at all. He only said that he was sorry that the fate of Akon's first apprentice would end this way. Throwing So at the blood cult cadet teacher, Akon focuses on the healer and angrily asks how dare he ignore Akon. Akon threatens to get rid of the 6th star of the blood cult because she is a patient of the healer, and it would be important to him if such an important patient were to go missing. However, even Akon tenses up at the moment, interrupting his monologue and threats. Soa notices that it's not just Akon who has gone quiet, but everyone else as well. They have abruptly stopped talking and stopped talking. However, they have caught some sort of shock effect. So notices that the blood cult pole star's throat is vibrating. However, she herself is silent. He suspects that together with Akon, they are communicating using some sort of vibration technique. Akon asks everyone else to wait for them outside the door and leave the room. Together with the cadet apprentice, Su leaves the room going outside. However, he turns around puzzled. He still doesn't understand who the healer in that shadow is treating. Akon asks the 6th blood star if this is true, but doesn't elaborate on what exactly he means. But his face tenses. He also adds that if it turns out to be false and untrue, the 6th star will answer for it with his head. The 6th star fills Akon in that she was telling the truth and he shouldn't worry. So is well aware that the doctor is most likely busy with someone very important, for this man cannot be disturbed even by Akon, even though he is strong and has the status of an elder. Avatars of Swords, John and Sodan asked So who he thought was at the healer's appointment. But So doesn't know. He thought it was the cult leader. But he's dead now. There's no telling who Akon would show such high regard for. John jokingly says that it's silly to ask Sodan such a question, since he can't know. But Sodan reminds him that he has been reborn and remembers information from his past life. And it's only at this point that John realizes that it wasn't Sodan's silly joke that time, but a real fact. So didn't wait long for Sodan and John to finish their negotiations and decided to go find the kitchen to get a drink and refreshment. Sue went looking for a kitchen, and upon entering one of the buildings, he thought this was the one he was looking for. Before his eyes, however, he found himself facing a girl who was stuffing herself with food, mostly meat, and didn't even pay attention to the fact that a stranger had entered the kitchen. So wished her a pleasant appetite, and at that moment she noticed him, and in doing so was very much surprised, as if she was the only one who could have come in here. Her reaction startled Sue, and he immediately ran away, slamming the door behind him. She ran to stop him and asked in a loud voice if he was a disciple of one of the elders. She asked to forget the scene where she gorged herself on beef, because she's on a diet now and shouldn't be eating such things. For her silence, she paid 2 silver a moment to respect Sao. Their dialogue is interrupted, for Akon, standing behind them, is already calling out to So, calling him a disciple. Sao immediately ran towards Akon. However, the girl was surprised by this and asked Sue to stop, but he ignored the request. Akon immediately punches Sue in the back with his fist, nailing him to the floor and telling him that no one will be waiting for him during the fight. Akon immediately began a mini-interrogation, asking where Sue was and what he was doing, and immediately got an honest answer that he was just looking for somewhere to get a drink of water. In a moment, Sue heard this girl's voice in his head. However, her lips did not open and no one else could hear, but the aura around her body clearly appeared. She asked him not to tell anyone about her. The 6th Blood Star praised the relationship between Akon and his student and also called it a good one. Staring into the eyes of the 6th Blood Star, Sue once again felt a strange emotion and enchantment in his head that seemed to be hiding him. Akon immediately rushed to cover Sue's eyes, saying that he was too weak and inexperienced to look into the eyes of such a strong woman. Akon covered So with his hand and asked the witch not to do anything stupid. She only grinned and said that she wouldn't dare do anything in the presence of one of the elders, and later also added that it was time for them to go. She, along with her men, began to leave and said she would be glad to see Akon next time, and he was glad to see her go. Akon informs Sao that it wasn't that simple, and some special herb needs to be found to cure him. Sue immediately realizes that he needs to find the divine flower. In his past life, he knew that the healer had searched for this flower before. Akon also said that the first person who finds this herb for him will receive a plaque that will allow him to receive treatment from a healer at any time. However, So doesn't understand how they will search for this herb in the winter. However, Akon pleases Sue by saying that he knows where to find that flower. The main problem is to keep that young lady from interfering with all of this. Akon talks about how he's about to tell Sue a secret that he must keep because it's very important. Akon reports that the girl who is the 6th star of the blood cult is not only a star, she is also the granddaughter of the former leader of the blood cult. Later, So told Sedan the importance of the information Akon had given him, for there had not been such a strong monopoly of the blood cult before. So says that previously one man, the first leader of the blood cult, merged many sects and organizations into one, creating a huge cult known as the blood cult. Then the world's most powerful individuals and organizations banded together to defeat the leader of the blood cult, the blood demon. However, in one of the battles against very strong enemies, he could not stand and died in the battle. At the same time, his opponents began to destroy his family members one by one in order to prevent the restoration of the cult. But today, Sue was shocked to find out that the doctor's appointment was with the granddaughter of the very same blood demon. Lying at sunset and talking to Sedan, Sao decides that he should try harder and harder to avoid becoming a pawn in the hands of someone higher up, as he was in his previous life, but his train of thought is interrupted by Sedan herself, who suddenly wonders if he is really going to go looking for that herb. Sao decides to start searching for the herb, because this way he will not only regain his Dantean power, but also got good acquaintances and reputation in the face of such a strong healer. Sodan encourages Su to go look for weed right now. However, he clearly states that it just doesn't make sense. So tells Sodan that this herb is sleeping now. It took the healer 4 days to find this herb, precisely because he didn't know what it was. So decides that they will go on the search when the sun has set and all the people have dispersed, for only then will the search begin to make sense. Here it is. So is in great shape, using small movement techniques moving through the forest in search of a flower. Right during his quest, he is disturbed by John, who is clearly about to tell Sao something not so nice. So says she already knows everything, and together with John, they turn around, noticing some girl flying behind So. So asks John to clue him in on who is chasing him, to which John replies that it's the same girl who was at the food warehouse this morning. What becomes most startling to John is that she moves almost at his speed and catches up with him. This comes as a shock to So, for he doesn't understand how with her normally female body she can gain such a high speed. So decides to slow her down somehow, however he's not going to harm her either. He aims his sword technique straight into the snow, thus creating a snow curtain behind him, lifting the snow up in the air, then shocking this girl who is still flying behind him. So stops and decides to climb a bamboo, thus hiding from this girl and getting away from her harassment. So does just that. Excited about his plan, he is already ready to get off the ground and fly upwards into the bamboo. However, Sodan's stricken face and John's sharp shout for a look upstairs interrupts all of Sao's plans. Upstairs behind his back is already the same girl, and in her fist, a violet-colored energy is gathered. She asks Su to freeze in place, and afterward gathers the energy right at her fingertips. A second after that, she pours all of her stored energy directly into Su, but he manages to hold back the energy with his sword. Sao tries to ask her the purpose of her trying to attack and kill him, however he gets nothing in response. Landing on the ground, Su begins to realize that she is stronger than he is, and this plays a great danger to him and his quest. Ignoring everything he says, she starts the dialogue by praising him, because according to her information, Su has no Dantian, but he is still excellent at moving techniques. However, right after that, she flies over him and delivers another blow. Su, in turn, barely has time to dodge, the attack coming very close to him and very fast. Su genuinely doesn't understand what kind of techniques and moves she uses. He compares her strikes to hawk's lunges towards his prey. Su also notices that her hands and body are covered in a red aura. He realizes that she possesses the techniques of the very witch of the 6-star cult. Barely fending off the attacks, Su realizes that it's useless to continue fighting like this, because he's just wasting time and his situation is only getting worse. He realizes that he has no physical or moral chance of getting into an equal fight with her, so he decides to get her to talk to him. Directing the energy of the strike downwards, Sao creates a snowstorm, thus blocking her basic attacks and creating distance between them. She realizes this and asks why he is purposely creating such a large distance between them. But So, without giving an answer, asks why she attacked him in the first place. She stopped her attacks and told Su that she thought it was suspicious that he had run off in the middle of the night, but Su was shocked by this response. He didn't think it was worth killing him for. However, when asked why she cared where he was going, she replied that she knew that Su knew where to find herbs for the healer, which further shocked Su himself. So doesn't understand how she knows this, and classically begins to cower at the fool, saying that if he went looking for weed, he wouldn't do it in the middle of the night. She informs him that he should not be afraid of her. Her name is Heian, and she is the apprentice of a Pole blood star, and she is a friend of the healer. Su immediately tries to blend in with all the dialogue and walk with Hyung. However, she notices this and asks to be taken along on her search for a healing herb. In return, she tells him that she will provide all of her signs with the opportunity to visit the Divine Pavilion. Sodan immediately says that the deal is a good one and should be accepted. But Su himself thinks otherwise and asks Sodan to take his time. So explains to Sodan that this girl is very impatient and has no bargaining skills at all, which he may be able to get more out of her, as she proved this morning at the pavilion by giving him 2 silver coins for a small favor. So carries out the plan and asks her to give him some more reward to supposedly cement their cooperation. He asks her to teach him that gliding motion when she attacked him like a hawk attacks prey. She talks about how it's very rude of him to ask her to teach him another master's techniques, but in her mind, Su realizes that she will teach him, because that's the kind of person she is. She agrees as Sao had planned, but places the condition that the technique must only perform on those whom So plans to kill afterward. So Sodan and John decide that she wants this friendship very badly if she agrees to such far from equal terms. She also admonishes Su, telling him that he is expending too much energy on movement techniques, and as someone without a dantian, it is dangerous for him to do so, as he could simply die. However, Su doesn't stop being cheeky, and asks her how she even realized he was searching for this herb. Her answer and explanation was simple. She only had a guess, for on the day while everyone was looking, So wasn't there, and when everyone dispersed and night came, he came right out. The second major guess is that Su confirmed all her guesses with his question, that's all. Su asks her to address him informally since he's younger than her, but she deploys the nonsense he said, talking about how he could even think that. So finds a place with grass, it's a cleft deep in the canyon, and on the way down they discuss the situation in the morning. So promises that after all the presents he'll pretend he's never seen anything, but Ha-young is still worried about it. And so at last they find this flower and pluck it to give it to the healer. Ha-young is also very happy that they were able to get this flower. Su notices her happiness, and they make the decision to go on their way. However, right at that moment, 2 unknown men with swords and robes attack So and Ha-young without anyone but John noticing their presence. One of the unknowns takes the flower, while the other is ordered to deal with the 2. Following orders, he attacks and knocks Ha-young out with a leg kick. Sao, in an attempt to bear the sword of the south winds, notices how this person is already at his back. He apologizes to the disciple of one of the elders and then instantly strikes a blow with his normal hand to Su's back. Su fell to the floor and never got up, and Ha-young quickly regained her senses and went in pursuit of the 2. After not much time, Su comes to his senses and the pressure on the punching points subsides. John explains that this is due to the fact that Su's energy has begun to absorb the attack. Sodan proceeds to insult Ha-young right away, calling her a stupid pig who ungratefully walked away from someone who's been helping her all this time. However, at Sodan's challenge to blow up and follow them to pick up the flower, So says that he probably won't have to do that, because that flower wasn't fully mature, shocking Sodan and John with his words. So explains that he has experience in this, and the full flower has 7 fruits of energy, and also emits a green aura, not purple. So talks about how there's a bunch of such grass in these rocks, but it's all so unripe, hence not usable, hence just useless to collect. So's search continued, and indeed something was found in a waterfall not far from the cliff and training areas. So is happy with the find, and praises everyone, and informs them that the fact that those guys caught up with them so early even played into their hands on the bottom line. So shows Sodan and John the ripe fruit, calling it just the way it should be. However, while Sao is busy gathering this plant, Sodan notices a broken old blade lying nearby and informs him that he has something to say. Sao doesn't betray attention to Su's request and continues her gathering. However, she still such dares to listen to the blade. From him, Sodan gets the signal that they need to escape immediately and yells it out to Sao. However, it becomes too late, and a huge purple snake with a long tongue appears right above Su's head. Barely dodging the kite's attack, Su channeled the south wind's attack beneath him, creating a sharp upward climb. John reports that he has not seen one before, as does So himself. They are both very surprised by some unknown snake, However, Sao can barely see it as the cave is dark. So talks about how it's almost impossible to fight as the cave is dark. He can't see anything in the dark at all. Su tries to leave the place, as he has collected the flower and there is no point in staying here anymore, as well as fighting that snake. However, this snake is also heading towards Su, though it doesn't resemble a snake much anymore, because in its center part it's as if it's a human. Sodan informs them that So should leave faster since she's already behind them, but John suggests that there's no time to leave. From John and Sodan's description, So tries to attack this snake in the dark at their dictation. The entity in question doesn't stop either, and reaching out its paw tries to grab Sao. So manages to strike. He uses the second form of the shining star and hits right in the center of the body of the entity in question. Sao realizes that the attack was successful, and the entity in question collapses to the floor. Sao doesn't realize what this creature is. However, he is very much entertained by the fact that he manages to inflict attacks on it and harm this entity. John advises So to do the damage right now, while the entity in question has yet to come to its senses. So decides to destroy this thing for all it's worth and springs into action. Sao is using one of his strongest techniques and is going to defeat this entity with a single action. Su applies the rippling tiger technique, thus demolishing the entity in question, and even John confirms that the attack was indeed successful. However, immediately after this attack, Su becomes very ill, with seizures, vomiting, fever, and a sudden withdrawal of strength. Immediately afterward, he falls straight to the ground without any strength and doesn't move. Barely finding the strength, he rises. However, his mouth is bleeding as his entire arm is full of blood. So immediately notices that there is a wound on his arm, and some kind of poison is spreading through the veins near it, as if it had already affected his entire body. Sao is very sick. His fever is very high. All that saves him is the internal energy that tries to fight the poison that is spreading through his body. Sao realizes that he is starting to lose his mental clarity, and better not to stop, he decides to get the herb he collected and try to use it in some way. The poison has already almost completely affected Su's body, but he simply decides to eat the entire flower at once. Immediately afterward, his throat feels like it's covered in ice, and breathing becomes very difficult, almost impossible. No air passes through. Very high and low temperature battled together in Sao's body, so Dan nearby tries to talk to Su, but it comes out very badly. She asks him to use energy to create circulation of temperature in the body. Sodan screams about Sao being given another chance at life. He shouldn't die so easily. He needs to fight to the end. Sao heard Sodan's words. They gave him a lot of motivation. He realizes that this is his last chance to stay in this world. Su decides that if he can't take this pain now and give up, he will be no better than he was in his past life. So tries to keep his balance. He manages to stabilize his mind so he doesn't pass out. A pair of stars glowed on Su's hand, his hand covered in poison. A miracle happens. Su's condition stabilized, and he began to feel that very feeling with fire again. Sao heard some voice in his head. That voice knocked him down, and once again he lost consciousness and started screaming in pain. However, it was as if Su's body had split into two. One part was very hot, and the other part was very cold. That voice he heard, it belongs to John, and John tells So to keep circulating, for that's the only thing that can save him. John talks about not losing that focus. So should keep trying to control his energy and add new energy. So obeys John and tries to keep the energy circulating through the body. John explains that Sao should visualize his inner energy as a vast, calm lake, despite the seas raging in his body. John also says that after So manages to create a calm lake of energy in his body, he needs to direct the two rays that are raging in his body directly into that lake. The raging energy in his body has stopped. Su manages to keep his balance again. So took control of this energy. He was able to control it and suppressed it in his body, thus defeating the poison. Sao finds a new little ability. The more stars appear on his hand, the better he can hear his swords, and the greater that distance, he could hear John even though he was at the top of the cliff. John also talks about how since they're in the valley of the 6 paths of blood, they should look for old records of ancient swords. Sao begins to examine the body of the creature he defeated. However, John reports that the creature's form is strange, and it is possible that it is immortal. This frightened Su, but there was no time to be frightened, for immediately after these words, the monster came to life and continued its attacks. So fell down again. Sadan asked if Su was okay. He confirmed that he was fine. So listens to John's advice, who says to use his internal energy to examine his body inside. Immediately after that, he felt the fact that his energy had become 3 times more powerful and much larger. John also talks about how the monster in question is most likely hunting this flower, and it's drooling for it. So Dan, John, and Su conclude that after surviving the deadly moment, his energy has reached a new level, and he is now on par with top-notch martial artists. So Dan, as always, comes up with a very brilliant idea to use the second flower to restart these processes in Sao's body, thus causing him to have a seizure again and taking his energy to a new level. However, John and Sao decides that it is best not to listen to Sodan at times like this, for her idea will only lead to ruin. As an answer to Sodan's joke, Su left her alone in the cave for a couple minutes. However, with her new abilities, he could still hear her. However, the events of the manga take us to 2 thieves who recently stole a flower and received a chase from Hyung in the set. One of the thieves praises the other, saying that following Su and stealing the flower that way was a great idea. However, the second thief was more concerned with how Su, without the Dantian, was able to fight and not get killed by their strike. That was impressive. But right during the dialogue between the 2 thieves, one of them dies, his head flying off his shoulders in a second and a stream of blood spreading several meters. It was Hyung. Very insistent, she asks the other thief to return the flower to her. The thief is shocked that with such a childish female body, she was able to overpower his partner. But he decides to strike instead of giving the flower back. However, it doesn't help at all. Even before his attack begins, she deftly cuts his body into pieces in a couple of actions. But it turns out that it wasn't her who made the attack, but the 6th blood star that appeared behind the thief's back in 1 second. The 6th blood star has a dialogue with Hyung, and the latter is very sorry for what happened. The 6th blood star was very surprised to see that Hyung had managed to take the flower and find it. The 6th blood star says that they can head back home now that the task is done, but Hyung interrupts her and tells her that she has more unfinished business. Meanwhile, Su is already returning from the canyon in one piece, having gotten away from that creature. However, he finds that he can now jump and move at a much faster speed than before. His jumps are now higher and faster. On the way home, Sodan, and John discover that the very same Hyung is probably bearing down on them ahead. Su is very surprised, because all this time she has continued the chase, and that takes a lot of effort. John also talks about how with the new features, Su has the strength to show a rating as good as what Hyung is showing. Hyung was very worried about Su. She apologizes for not helping him right away, and also calls him master. He gives thanks that he has forgiven her, but wonders why there is blood on his feet. Hyung shows her femininity and asks about what and how it was, but Su simply asks if she was able to get the flower back. Hyung talks about yes, however, with the help of her teacher, and now she has the flower because she rushed to find Su. So is not at all surprised by this outcome. Hyung also said she's very apologetic, but their plaque agreement is still in full force. However, Su asks right away if he's really going to be given the plaques, to which Hyung gives the okay, but says that he'll most likely need to give something in return, which shocks Su again. The events of the manga take us to an unknown location somewhere in a small province, where Akon and the 6th star are talking about something. The 6th star says that all you have to do is fulfill her request, and then she will definitely give the plaque back. Akon doesn't like it. He talks about how he asked her not to interfere, and she did, and now she's asking for something for the plaque. The 6th star talks about some 2 options, informing Akon that he has only 2, and the first is to join them, however to what, she didn't mention. The second option was also not named, it was hidden. Akon says he will not fulfill any such request for the sake of restoring the disciples' dantian. However, at that moment, Su and Hyung himself enters the building to greet their masters. Akon beats Su right away, saying he's late and he's not going to get anywhere here. However, here comes a healer who says that unfortunately the 6th star will need to find the flower again. The doctor talks about how this flower was immature and its properties were lacking. The doctor explains to the 6th star about the flower having to have 7 fruits, which causes her to be shocked. So interrupts them all, apologizes, and talks about how it's not necessary. So pulls out a flower and tells him that he found the right one, and then hands it to the doctor, who tells him that it's the right one. This makes Akon laugh, and he calls Sao a worthy student of a worthy teacher. So asks Akon if the 6th star gave him the plaque they agreed on. However, Akon talks about her putting another new condition on the table. The 6th star realizes that she is now unable to refuse, yet her face is tense and worried for some reason. However, before arriving at the building, outside the two of them, Su told Hyung that he didn't trust her master, 6 paths of blood. At that time, Su told Hyung about the 6th blood star not handing him the plaque, but Hyung assured that it would realistically happen. Hyung assured So of this, and even offered to make a bet. They come to an argument that if Sao is right, Hyung just gives him the plaque. However, at the moment when Su was remembering Hyung's promise, the 6th blood star cut off her fingers with a technique and apologized for disrespecting the request and treaty with the 4th elder in the person of Akon. However, this doesn't surprise Akon at all. He talks about how she doesn't even have a whole arm to pay for it. Akon suggests that she's fortunately not all her intelligence gone to waste and forgives the 6th blood star. The 6th blood star thanks Akon, but their conversation is interrupted by the healer, who asks them not to make any rash and drastic actions while such an important patient is here. Akon tells the healer that he had better keep his word to his apprentice and give him the tablet. The healer gives the go-ahead, but says Sao had better come by noon, for he has an important patient now. At noon the next day it does so sends to the Valley of the Six to meet with the Kalital to broach the subject of his dantian. So picks up on the fact that in such icy mountains, Akon's mobility techniques help a lot. Sodan decides to share a note with Su. She noticed that everyone around her, even the 6th blood star and the healer, are very much considering Hyung's opinion. Taking one look at her, they immediately agreed to help Su. Sodan also talks about how the moment her teacher cut off her fingers, Hyung just stood there and watched. Sao also notices this, the thought creeping into his head that this girl is not that simple, and she is clearly not just a 6th blood star disciple. Sodan tells her guess she suspects that Hyung is the daughter of the 6th star, but Su interrupts Sodan and talks about how he thinks Hyung is the granddaughter of the blood demon himself. Sodan and John are shocked by what Su said. They don't understand at all why he's suddenly making strong conclusions. So recalls that she has a strict diet and suspects that she may be actively gaining due to some sort of ailment. Sao directly relates this to her reasoning, saying that it could be since she is a direct heir to the blood cult. He also brings up a mysterious woman in the healer's office about whom nothing is known. So assumes it's Hyung's doppelganger. So broadcasts that a huge number of people want to kidnap the blood demon heirs for their experiments and research on their bodies. John also points out another point. He doesn't understand why. If the territory is controlled by a blood cult, the servants have to hide their identities. It doesn't make sense at all. Already at the entrance to the city, Su decides that his theory is necessarily correct. What makes him think there can only be one heir to the blood cult in the first place? There could be several. However, at the entrance to the city, Su becomes uncomfortable as he begins to hear the voices of 100 swords that belong to different fighters walking nearby. John advises Soe to try not to focus on them, thus getting away from contact with their voices. Directing the energy to his head, Su notices that it does help, and the other swords' conversations have become muffled and unintelligible. However, while Su was taking his attention away from his swords, he didn't see the red-haired samurai girl walk up to him and afterward questioned who he was and what he was doing here. Sao just starts to give a response, however, interrupting his dialogue, she strikes. Striking, Su doesn't have time to dodge, and she talks about Su being too slow. She begins to speak about even if he's simply a pupil, however, then interrupts her phrase with delight. She notices that Su has managed to survive and reduce the damage of her attack, much to her delight. Su notices that she is very strong. She called him slow before he even had a chance to open his mouth. She speaks of being shocked that an ordinary student was able to hold her power, but Su's thoughts are also stunned, for even with the third level of energy, he is in great pain. She talks about how this is very funny and starts to bare her very huge sword. However, Hyung appears above and yells for the girl to stop. She tells her that Su is Akchon's apprentice. She is surprised when she hears the elder's name, and even more surprised when she learns that he has taken on an apprentice. She says that So should have said so right away since she almost killed him, and asks if she scared him. She is surprised that Su was able to block her attack and also praises Akon, saying that he has raised a fine student, but Su does not understand her good behavior because she wanted to kill him just a moment before. She also asks how Teacher Su is doing, but Su's mind is busy analyzing her as a person, and he notices that she brags a lot about her abilities. Su notices that she speaks of Akon as if she is above him in status. However, his thoughts are thwarted by her phrasing. She speaks of how no one has seen Akon in years, as well as the second blood star. Sao notices that Akon and the second star is like dust to her, at which point Hyung approaches her and asks why she came back if she talked about leaving. This reminds Su that her character and dialogue reminds him of Hyung. She replies to Hyung that the 6th Blood Valley does not belong to her and she will leave it when she sees fit, and advises Hyung to stop kicking her out. The healer's voice interrupts the situation. As he exits the building, he notices So and asks if he has arrived. The healer's appearance upsets her. She talks about him interrupting all the fun. She also talks about leaving, and asks So to tell Akon to say hi to him when she meets him. Afterward, she winks at Su and asks him for the next time they meet, they have a duel. This strikes So. Sedan immediately agrees to such a thing with a grin and a smirk, and John in turn talks about how his past late owner used to say that you have to be extremely careful with girls like that. Su, her request scares the crap out of him, but what scares him more is the phrasing of her sword, which endlessly repeated that he wants to die. So decides to strike up a dialogue with Hyung standing next to him and asks if she's okay. However, Hyung interrupts him and tells him that the healer has been waiting for him standing on his doorstep for a while now. When Su decided to ask about the woman, Hyung immediately cut off the dialogue on the half-word, clearly letting her know that she didn't want to chat about her. Su already has a few assumptions about this woman, but decides that he shouldn't stick his nose in everything, just because he is Elder Akshon's apprentice. Akshon proceeded to the examination the healer had arranged for him. However, right at the beginning of the examination, the healer notices the fact that there is more cold energy in Su's body than the rest. He calls it strange. The healer immediately asks how it is that Su ate the very flower that creates cold, but Su doesn't immediately understand where the healer got his information about it. John talks about being a healer who has treated the strongest people and knows many secrets. John assures Sao that he can be trusted to tell him how things were, so shouldn't worry about that. So fully tells the healer the whole story of how he mined the flower and came across that creature in the caves. Su's story is understandable to the healer. He knows about the creature and the poison. However, he doesn't understand how Su was healed by the flower, as the flower itself has no regeneration and restoration ability. The healer tells Su that he also notices the hot yang energy in his body, which should have killed him long ago. In his thoughts, Su begins to analyze everything that has happened to him again, to understand how he is still alive. He wonders and learns from the healer about what would happen if only one of these two energies remained in his body. The healer reports that he would have died of poisoning long ago if that were the case, but somehow both energies are cycling and balancing through Su's body. The healer compares this process to taking an elixir, These words cause a huge shock to Su. Su asks if this means that his body's energy recovery process is now much better and higher than a normal person's. The healer confirms Su's speculation, saying that in such a case, the energy in Su's body should indeed accumulate many times faster than usual, but it is worth maintaining a balance of energies to do so. Immediately after his words, the healer hands So his plaque, which will allow So to use his services for free if needed. This action scares So. After all, the healer was supposed to cure his core Dantian, which is what So came all this way for. He is terribly upset that he gets a plaque instead of a cure. But he only shocks the healer with his words, and afterward, the healer informs him that there is no need for that. Everything is perfect with So's core. So almost cried out in shock. This shocked him a lot, the healer asked, about Su not knowing about it. The healer assumes this is the case, since Su had asked for his treatment, but the healer only pointed out to So where his lower Dantian was located in his body. The healer continues to shock Su by saying that his core is in place, but it resembles a nearly extinguished bonfire that has begun to flare up again. This whole piece of information continues to shock Su. He checks with the healer to see if he means that after a time, his core will become the same again on its own. The healer fills him in that this will happen. Such cases can be counted on the fingers, however they have been. The healer ends up informing Su that he doesn't need treatment, but he has rightfully earned the plaque and has full opportunity to take it back. So thanks the healer profusely, calling him master, but the healer tells him that no thanks are needed, for he has done nothing wrong. So Dan is very happy for So, saying that they now have the healer's tablet in addition to So's core information, and Su promises to find a worthy use for it. However, when asked by Sodan how Su's core had regenerated itself, he replied that according to his guess, it had happened then in the cave after the poisoning. He had developed such regeneration that he was able to restore his Dantian to her. Sodan also agrees, saying that there is logic in Su's words, in which case he should be grateful to that monster for doing so. Sodan notices John's reticence on the subject and tries to question him about it, to which he replies that rebuilding the core is certainly good, but he has some misgivings about it. John reminds So and Sodan that his first late owner made the decision to destroy his Dantian before mastering the techniques of the Shining Star. Soe begins to wonder, as John's words make a lot of sense, if the two cores of energy can get along in So's body together and find harmony. John suggests that So should think about that, because that way one day you could lose what he's been trying to create for so long. Back home in Akon's den, So told him about his encounter with that strange girl. Akon replied that he really should have been worried. Akon talks about how Su is a big lucky guy and has met two of them in person at once, but the wording of them raises questions for Su. John, Su, and Sodan immediately realize that it's about Su meeting two blood cult heiresses at once. Akon continues to talk to himself and tells himself that he should really decide which one he wants to support. Akon began to tell the story, and began with the information that at his peak, the head of the blood cult was so powerful that he was called Apex, not only in the cult, but in all sects in general. Akon says he went into everything like a storm, and at his peak he was so strong that he would go into absolutely any fight with everything without thinking. Akon also narrated that with him, it seemed to him that uniting all of Jianghu might have been more than just a dream. However, the leader was killed, no matter how strong he was in general. When all the enemies united against him at once, the level of strength began to lose importance. Akon said that after going through the shock of the leader's death, it seemed to him that it was always all for nothing. The other members of the cult were always trying to revive his importance and build up his strength again. But all attempts failed, and it seemed to Akon that there could be no way out at all. From that moment on, Akon just started traveling unrestrained, thinking he should use the time he has left to realize his lifelong dreams. So immediately realizes that it's about his hundreds of fights that John was talking about. Akon narrated that even though he had tried to live such a life, his attention was still drawn to the sprouts left by the leader of the blood cult. Akon asked how Su would have acted in his place, but Su himself didn't quite understand what Akon meant. Soe can see by the look in Akchon's eyes that he has already made up his mind. Soe suspects that this question is a test. Su says that Akon should either stay watching from the sidelines and stay out of it, or pick one side and start helping it. So decides that his answer is completely correct, for from his memories from his past life, he remembers that Akon did not make a choice in favor of either side. However, Akon coldly replies that we'll need more power, and with his answer he shocks Sao wildly. Akon decides to build up his forces as well as Su's by making him at least captain level. So knew both now and from his past life that what distinguished Akon from the other elders and the 7 stars was that he was very eccentric and also kept to himself from everyone else. However, today's factor of Akon deciding to change tactics indicates that the future that Su knows from his past life is going to change. So tells him that in his past life, Akchon's future wasn't much cheerful. All he knew was that after the activation of the blood cult, Akon chose a strange path. Due to his eccentricity, Akon refused to act as he would be ordered to in the future by the cult, and he paid the price in a battle with Jin Gyu, the Flame King, in which Akon lost his right arm. Sodan is already asking Su if he wonders how things will turn out this time, as events are changing. Sao realizes that he is one of those who changes this story himself. For now, he is no longer an ordinary cadet, but a student of one of the elders who has contact with one of the heiresses of the blood cult. John, also continuing So's thoughts, leads him to the idea that if Akon re-establishes a huge power and everyone starts to reckon with him, then as his student, it will be a great springboard for growth. So realizes that he needs to become a captain to not let his teacher down. He decides to learn and become stronger. However, now he decides how he will combine multiple energies at once. Sodan decides to talk to John about techniques that can help Su, to which John tells him that he remembers a little about a technique his past late owner used to destroy the Dantian. This technique is based on energy circulation. However, hearing this dialogue, Su remembers something and thanks Sodan and John for their help. Immediately afterward, Su headed to his brothers in order to learn about a certain technique that the brothers know from Akon. So tries to ask them, but they are not in a hurry to tell him anything and ask him to go to the master. But So does not know where he is at the moment. So decides to wait for the master, and in the meantime, for 3 days, he trains the techniques of balancing and circulating energy in the body. It's also shocking to Su how Akon and the twins use these techniques, as his entire body swells up from a little use and his heart rate rises wildly. In a moment, Su's circulation is interrupted by a certain girl who appeared behind his back a second ago. The girl introduces herself as a messenger of the 6th blood star, which interests Soe and shocks her. She reports that he is summoned to the 6th valley, whereupon he arrives there. The 6th blood star meets Su and hands him the plaque from Hyung, but Su notices that her fingers are still in place, even though he saw her cut them off himself. Sodan suggests that it could have been done by the same healer, but Sao is shocked that he might be able to recover such an organ. Sodan suggests about how he can sew on a human head as well. Su disappoints her by saying that it's no longer possible. However, a second after that, the 6th star grabs Sao's hand, much to his bewilderment. Sao notices that this is the very technique he is unable to reflect, and the energy emitted by the 6th star is already dispersing through Sao's body. With such a technique of hers, the 6th star checked the amounts of Su's internal energy to make sure of his strength. Luckily, she doesn't know that he has 2 cores and only checks 1. Also, the 6th stargazer points So to a table with guests and asks him to take them, for they will help restore the Dantian. Su suspects that Hyung prepared these guests for him. The 6th star also asks to use the plaque wisely. However, just before Su was about to leave, the 6th star stopped him with her question. She wanted to know if Su wanted to make a bet. She asks if Su wants to make a bet, because as Master Hyung, it was a shame for her to lose back then, and she wants to win back. but it makes Sue uneasy because she doesn't even want to return the plaque she gave him today. She talks about the fact that if Sue wins the bet, she's willing to teach him a thing or two, though she admits that Akon might be better at it. So is also surprised that she somehow thinks she's being very arrogant, since she thinks So would immediately agree after that. She interrupts him again when he wants to bow out and starts talking about what will happen if she wins. All she asks is that if she wins, Sao talk to Akon and ask him to reconsider the 6th star's offer. She tells Sue that the conditions are simple and the prizes are interesting. Aren't those the ideal conditions in her opinion? So Don immediately suggests that the conditions are really easy for Sue, but Sue is hesitant, even though he realizes that there's nothing terrible about losing. So realizes that the offer is indeed a very good one, but it still depends on the bet itself. The 6th blood star says she has an idea and asks the girl standing behind her in the shadows to come over to her. Out comes the same girl who was kidnapped into the blood cult on the same day as Sue. However, Sue doesn't immediately understand everything and asks her if she knows him, to which he gets the answer that such behavior is too rude. Sao pretends to remember everything abruptly, but in his head he clearly realizes that he was busy saving his own skin that day, and he didn't remember anyone. Even though he had upset this girl, the 6th blood star was happy that they were already acquainted, and after she revealed that the girl's name was Yewa, she also added that she had taken her in 3 days ago. However, upon hearing her name, Sue is greatly surprised. He realizes that he hasn't seen her before. However, he remembers well that he has seen that name before and more than once. He recalls that in a past life, this girl had risen from a clueless first-rank cadet to a high rank and a 6th star apprentice with tons of abilities. However, So realizes that she looks like the most ordinary child right now. The 6th blood star informs her that there will be a test in the cult in 6 months, and her plans are to make Yewa a high rank. John is surprised that the 6th star wants to make this cadet the first-class master in just half a year, but Sue is no longer surprised by such wild self-confidence of the 6th star. However, Sue realizes that people always want to be apprenticed to just such people, because they are the best at uncovering people's hidden talents. In his head, Sao also picks up on the fact that they are the same in this regard as Akon, who is also sure that Sao will become captain, but So returns to the topic and asks the 6th star what the point of their argument even is. The 6th star says it's very simple. The argument will be based on who becomes the high-ranking, Yewa or Sue. Sue also clarifies what would happen if they both became high-ranking captains, but the 6th star immediately explains that in that case they would fight a duel. So understands the thought process of someone who is used to solving everything by fighting, but he is not completely sure whether to agree to it. On the one hand, it is dangerous, and on the other hand, additional motivation to become a high rank, which he needs very much. Sao begins to think things over and remember that if he loses, Akon might think the wrong thing, but the opportunity to learn from such masters doesn't always fall to him either. He thinks back to the red-haired girl who will be up against him if he loses, and that's not much of a motivation, as she's content to be strong and confident in her status. So remembers that when he was a spy, he realized that in this world, power and knowledge decide everything, and walking between the two barricades is not a good idea. Sue decides to accept the 6 stars challenge and tells her that they will see each other again in 6 months. However, it turns out that Hyung heard the entire dialogue, and it didn't elicit a strongly positive reaction from her. After Sue leaves, Hyung talks about how he doesn't fully understand the whole point of acting, but tells his teacher that a guy like Sue can only be challenged to a bet when he's completely sure of something. After the 6th star also assures Yewa that with her abilities, it is impossible to lose, thus motivating her, and she in turn promises to try very hard. 6 months have passed since that dialogue, and the events of the manga take us to the day of the exam and to the Valley of Six, where it will take place today. The novice teacher is watching the battles. The exam has been going on for a long time. The teacher reports that they managed to get 37 mid-rank warriors. While some person is asking the teacher to give him another chance, the teacher remembers that he has 6 more people who will be taking the high rank test. The teacher explains the test. Newcomers pass the basic cult techniques and skill. This is enough for a low rank. The most capable of them go on to pass the test for the middle rank. This rank allows you to use techniques related to energy. Confirming that you are able to strike with energy is simple. You have to hit a stone so that it leaves a mark. After that, you are allowed to pass the test for the middle rank. The cadet then fights a high-ranking warrior, and if the latter manages to withstand 30 attacks, the cadet is allowed up to middle rank. The teacher explains that in their cult, ranks are only assigned by force, and no exceptions are made for anyone. Right after all the explanations, the teacher announces that the high-rank test is about to begin. However, a second after his words, he gets shocked. For after his words, the door opens, and he sees Akon with his 3 disciples, Sao and his brothers. The natives at once shocked at Akon's appearance, and whispering call him a barbarian. The teacher is so shocked at the sight of Akon, he didn't expect the 4th elder himself in the person of Akon to arrive for the exam. The teacher begins to explain something to Akon, however the latter does not listen, asking what he is muttering at all. So explains to Sedan that no one would approve of the fact that they just barged into the test, since everyone else had been tested before the test. So had heard of over 100 people taking the test this year, but about half were simply not allowed to take the test yet. Sao says that explains the elder's reaction. He also added that all the locals would not be happy if we skipped through the formalities and went straight to the test. So Dan begins trolling the other cadets, saying to let them try to become apprentices to Akon himself, the 4th elder. But these words don't surprise them much. Akon doesn't understand at all why he should worry about the opinion of some brat standing behind him right now. However, the teacher compliments him by saying that it's not only the weak cadets at the back, but also the captains who are in subordination to the other elders as well as the blood stars. The teacher says that they are watching to select good men to obey their ringleaders, so the teacher asks Akon if his students can at least show their abilities. Some woman standing behind in the shadows also intervenes in their dialogue. She says that the teacher's words are not without meaning. It turns out to be the 6th blood star, who tells Akon that these are the rules of her valley and not the teacher's fiction, and asks Akon to go along with them after all. Su notices her and her apprentice, whom he expected to see here, for he remembers their argument. Axion suggests that she is right, but her presence here suggests that she wanted to do the same thing. The 6th star asks the teacher what their students need to do to start the test. The teacher replies that the conditions are very simple. They only need to confirm the middle rank by leaving a mark on the stones with energy. The 6th star agrees to the terms and beckons to his subordinate Yehua. She answers her teacher's call, and Su is a little surprised, for there is nothing left of his former insecurity. His rival is feeling fine. Yehua uses her powers that the 6th star taught her, thus striking the stone hard. The cadets are surprised by the strength she showed. They immediately realize that she is worthy of a promotion. Yehua struck with such force that her hand marks were left on the stone after being hit with the technique. Right off the bat, she talks about how embarrassed she is because that's her max. The teacher suggests that this is completely sufficient to pass the test and calls the 6th star student very talented. She passes near Su and asks if he saw her hit. However, Su decides he's not going to use his innate energy. He's going to save it for a backup case. She reports that her powers have increased a lot in these 6 months, and Su will clearly lose to her, but he decides to use only 1 energy for now, which he has also worked hard on. Sao thinks about the fact that he doesn't even know how much energy he needs to use, since he didn't have to go this far in his previous life. However, he already manages to sense Akon's evil and powerful aura and decides that he clearly needs to perform better than Yehua. So is happy that in those 6 months he was able to use high blood flow techniques. It will help him today. Sao strains his strength and decides to use 80% of his power. Striking hard, he looks at his hand, but is shocked to see that his hand has remained in the stone and is simply stuck there. He also scares the cadets with this, which represents his great power if he managed to break through the rock and enter it. He's not doing much to pull his arm back out, though. Sedan says that in all likelihood he's very overextended. Beck also decides to hit the rock, talking about how he's about to break it, but he doesn't do so well. Immediately afterward, they notice Beck's twin brother flying headfirst into a rock behind them. He only manages to break the stone into two halves with a blow of his head, freeing Sue from its shackles. Akon starts laughing, saying that this is the bare minimum each of them had to demonstrate. The teacher has had enough of Akon's students and says that this is enough to start the test. However, Sao interrupts the teacher and says that he misunderstood them a bit. They are here to take the high-rank test, not the middle rank. To pass the test for the high, captain's rank, a cadet should have an average rank and should be able to withstand 12 lunges from the captain. Sue realizes that it's not much of a challenge, as the captain only needs 3 strikes to take down a mid-rank warrior, but they only fight at 60% of their strength. Suddenly, however, Akon grabs Sao's head, asking if it's true that he made a bet with the 6th blood star. Zoe realizes that the 6th star told Akon everything, and John confirms it, because he saw it. So realizes that this is all some big plan of hers, and the first move was made a long time ago. Akon scolds Sue for such actions, and threatens to break his legs next time if he gets involved in any ventures. However, Akon talks about how the idea of a bet is very interesting to him, and getting the Hellcat to teach him techniques was a good idea. Akon cheers for Sue and asks him to give them a lesson. There are only 3 ways to become a captain. The first is to serve through promotions to captain and vice captain, and the second is to complete a very serious mission successfully and gain status. And the third and fastest way is to fight 2 high-ranked masters with good swords, and then defeat them in less than 100 blows. The teacher turns to Sue and talks about how he is a very good student according to Akon, and he will wait for Sue's battle. Sodan and John begin to praise themselves and talk about getting Sue to show them all the techniques of a shining star sooner, thus proving his power. The teacher tells Sue that there's no point in stressing out. Since he's an apprentice elder, he'll always have the opportunity to rise to captain. Meanwhile, Sue notices the first warrior who will fight against him, Daijun. The teacher is jealous of Sue, saying that he too would like to be able to get lessons from Akon, and Sue notices his other opponent, Ho Yun. They are both high-ranking warriors. Immediately, the teacher yells out that the test has begun. Both of Sue's opponents immediately snap out of their seats, running to attack Sue himself. He manages to dodge both attacks from both sides by using a sharp lunge backwards. Attacks pass at Sue. He easily fends them off. And meanwhile, Sue hears the voice of a sword from the back and immediately pays attention. He immediately turns around and blocks the attack precisely because he was able to spot it beforehand, because he hears the voices of all the swords. One of the warriors doesn't realize how Sue blocked the attack without even looking at it, but before he could think about it, he was hit in the side by another blow from Sue. Both opponents are shocked by Sue's professionalism, as he didn't just fend off their combos, but also landed punches himself. It is immediately apparent to everyone that Sue has a vast amount of skill and combat experience, thus confirming his intentions of becoming a captain. Sodan and John continue to praise each other, as well as Akon with his training. In their opinion, that's what saved Sao all along. So also recalls how he often used to endure daily beatings from Akon, thus explaining to himself why it was so easy for him to hold back the blows. However, Sue begins to notice that his opponents have drastically changed their attack tactics and are no longer carrying 2 of them at the same time. They began to use sword techniques, to which Sue responded in kind, for in this he has great skill and experience. He strikes his opponent with an attacking technique, thereby both attacking and defending himself against his attacks. In this way, he goes from defense immediately to offense, maintaining his position and later improving it. They praise Sue's skills, but add that Sue is still just an ordinary kid and has no chance of overpowering the 2 of them. However, just a second after that, one of them notices that right in his leg is the blade that pierced him, and his entire leg is already covered in blood. Sue also decides that without any colleges, he will use his strongest techniques against them. Sue decides to use the Shining Dragon technique, Thus, he changes into the fourth type of shining star. With this technique alone, he rolls his second opponent to the floor while the first is still standing with his sword in his leg. Due to the huge effects of the techniques and the pile of dust, the first opponent doesn't notice that Su is already above his head, in full readiness to strike. Sao uses the meteor technique and the fifth shining star formation, and unleashes his attack directly at his opponent. So trapped his opponent, and he was unable to repel the attack, so he lost the opportunity to resist and continue the fight. Sao asks his opponent to stop his bleeding, for without that, he can't pull Sodan's sword out of his leg. So's opponent recognizes the fact that he was defeated, and also recognizes that So deserves the rank of captain and more. So enthralls the cadets with his moves. They are shocked by his punches and praise him, saying that he has shown shocking techniques. The cadet teacher is amazed by this fact, as Su managed to defeat them all in just a couple of attacks. The teacher also recognizes that this result exceeded his expectations. The teacher recognizes Akon's professionalism. However, Akon is known as a master fist fighter, and when the teacher heard Sao using swords, he thought his men would have an advantage in battle. However, this was not the case. The sixth star also notes Soi's progress in her thoughts, but she and everything can't understand why this is the case. She can't understand how Su has excelled so much at everything. She had thoughts that it was all due to Akon's teachings. However, she realizes that he is far from a swordsman, and can't be that good at wielding it. She knows that the fourth elder's techniques are designed to increase body and energy reserves, but his disciple Su shows techniques of a completely different profile, and even so, he shows not just a different profile, but a high level of a different profile. She realizes that the person who created Sao's techniques and close shouldn't be weaker than him. However, in the meantime, Sao turns to Akon. Akon praises So, which is quite unusual, and also says that he did a very even job. However, in his thoughts, Akon compares Su to the master of the southern sky, and realizes that Su is becoming more and more like him. This is all interrupted by Yehua. She asks her master in the person of the sixth star to allow her to start taking the captaincy test. She talks about how she will definitely win and show off her best techniques that she's learned, which even embarrasses the slightly sixth star. However, much to her dismay, failure awaited her. Yehua lost, not even reaching 50 attacks. Beck fought next, but his progress was bad, very bad, and Akon and Su even agreed that he was a jerk for his actions. John points out his bad luck, but Su says that he is hampered by his desire to finish the test faster, which is why he can't concentrate and make strong attacks. The sixth blood star suggests that Akon has raised outstanding students, but he himself sees this as a mockery of him. She fills Akon in that it's not, and she's surprised by it really, as not everyone is capable of learning Akon's fighting techniques. The sixth star shares that it surprises her that Akon is not just a martial artist, but also a sword master, judging by his apprentice in the form of Su. Akon asks her not to change the subject, and also asks if she doubts that the techniques belong to him. Akon talks about how she wasn't very observant, because he couldn't even think that no one here would recognize the attacks and techniques of the southern sky. This was the first time the sixth star's face became so badly shocked, she just couldn't believe what she had heard from Akon. She questioned if she had heard her, and if Akon was really talking about the very master of the southern sky. Akon talks about how he has been dead for a long time, but he had records that he made his entire life, and Akon has them in his possession. Everyone immediately began to talk about whether Akon himself had killed him, but he was only furious at such statements. He replied that to hell with these words, he was offended that such a unique opportunity was taken away from him. Su was surprised at Akon's words after all. He could have just lied, saying that he was the one who defeated the Southern Sky Master. However, when asked afterward where Akon got the secret tapes from, he said he was given them and so took back what he said a second ago. Akon says that these records are incomplete, but he has spent a great deal of time fighting with him and knows him better than anyone else. The sixth star wants to say Akon. However, he immediately interrupts her and gives out that, yes, he was the one who taught it all to Su through notes, adding that he improved and forgave the flaws of the Southern Sky techniques. Akon immediately said that you can consider So to be both his successor and the receiver of Southern Sky. By telling this, Akon confirmed his power once again, for he was not only able to understand and pass on the techniques of his nemesis, but also to improve them and introduce a receiver. John intervened by telling Zoe that there was nothing wrong with this, thus reminding everyone that the records and techniques of his first late owner would continue to exist, so his first owner was not doing it for nothing, and he also thanked Akon for calling Sawe the successor not only to himself, but also to the Southern Sky in front of everyone, thus not taking all the praise for himself. He was being honest. Meanwhile, Beck finished his fight. Though very difficult and sweaty, he made it to his feet. With 60 strikes, Beck passes the test, defeating his opponents, but for some reason he himself is not particularly happy about his high-ranking result. Akon begins to berate and beat Beck on the head, saying that he is dishonoring him as a student. Su praises Beck, saying he did well, but he in turn starts making excuses for Su, saying he could have finished even faster if they hadn't attacked together. It's time for the last cadet, Beck's twin brother, Woo Hyun. Akon immediately tells Woo Hyun that if he performs as disgracefully as his brother, he will go without food for a long time. The teacher announces the start of the test, but Su notices that one of the opponents has a sword. Su suspects that this is the teacher's way of denying Woo Hyun the opportunity to become captain, so that all three will not take the top rank. However, Woo Hyun closely lands one blow to his opponent's head and immediately knocks him out, and the other opponent gives up at the sight of this spectacle. Woo Hyun and his bald head rejoice because in less than 1 minute, with just a single head bump, Woo Hyun passes the test. Sodan and Su are amazed that Woo Hyun's strength is so high, and Su is glad he didn't intern with him in the past. Akon laughs wildly and Beck feels sad because his brother did much better and faster. The teacher also announced the results. Everyone passed except Yewa. After taking all the tests, absolutely everyone went to the ward in the 6th Blood Valley. Having already arrived, Sodan informs Su that a girl, one of the 6 Stars' subordinates, has been watching him from behind the whole way. Sodan points Su out to her. However, he shocks Sodan by saying that it's Hyung. Sodan is shocked. She knew about Hyung's diet and treatment, yet Hyung herself has become half the size she was before.
Sodan begins to taunt So, saying that he recognized her because of his very good observation of her.
On the way out, Beck wonders to Akon why they're all suddenly heading to the main hall of 6 Fingers. Akon tells Beck that the most important part, the selection, is about to begin. So also tells Sodan that the selection process is beginning, but in his opinion, there's nothing interesting here, as it's just going to be a simple assignment of positions. Right now, the commanders who had been sent from the Elders and Blood Stars would be selecting new members for the squad. Sodan talks about how it seems by that logic that So was selected by the captain of the Black Wolves in his past life. But So shatters her theory by saying that lower-ranking warriors, which he was in his past life, are not eligible for selection. Akon decides to take part in the selection as well, because he doesn't have any captains at his disposal, so it's up to him to decide who he wants to take on. Akon began the selection, but the cadets noticed that he poked his finger between 2 columns of plaques. Poking past, Akon created an almost even line with the planks, which immediately fell off the overall board. Akon strikes off exactly 10 of the 37 planks, thus leaving a board with 27 planks on it. Immediately afterward, he declares that he's taking everyone who's left as his subordinates, causing a huge shock to the 6th Blood Star. She is no less surprised by the cadet teacher, who doesn't understand what Akon needs 27 powerful warriors for. This gives a huge laugh to Sodahan. She likes Akshan's act and his idea. Soe is a little less shocked by this than everyone else, as he expected Akon to be a weirdo, but he didn't expect him to give a damn about everyone's opinion, including the rest of the elders. Akon says that because of his respect for the others, he left them one cadet each. He asks the ambassadors to tell them to make some sort of arrangement there already. The sixth Blood Star tries to stop Akon, telling him that he's taking on too many people. And wasn't he the one who stated at the General Assembly that he couldn't command a huge number of people? And here, there are 27 people at once. She also states that if Akon does so, it will be disrespectful to everyone else. Interrupting her, Akon says that he is very happy that such a topic has been brought up to her, but she doesn't understand Akon's train of thought. Akon announces that his goals have changed. He is going to recreate his own squad, and thus creates the first group of people, and since that is his goal, no one should have any objections. However, Akon says he still allows everyone to take a candidate each so as not to hurt their feelings. Reacting to this, Su imagines what would happen to the faces of the other elders and blood stars if Akon took them all at once. Addressing messengers from other elders and blood stars, Akon says that if anyone wants to condemn him and take away his new warriors, let them come to his house, or right here settle the matter, for he himself is ready to tear throats. The sixth blood star stops the argument. She realizes that if the elder decides to raise his own strong unit, it is not her and the others' right to try and stop him, especially when many have such units. However, in her thoughts, the sixth star realizes that if Akon does what he's up to now, he's going to enter the game, and for how much of a hard road that red-haired lady has chosen for herself, the sixth star realizes that once this news reaches her, she won't be left out of it. The cadet teacher announces that the high rank has gained 6 men and asks them to come forward. The cadet teacher asks each of the captains to give a beautiful speech so that the novice cadets can build on these words in the future. Sudan notices that high-ranking cadets are able to choose their own captain. Sao confirms this fact by saying that back in his past life, the highest-ranking cadets chose their own captain. So says that fundamentally it will now depend on the eloquence of the captains themselves. Akon turns to Sao and talks about how we need to get all the candidates that are here. These words strain Su. He doesn't understand why he has to do this when it's more logical for Akon to do it using his high status. But that answer didn't suit Akon. He doesn't understand why he needs to stand to praise himself, and why Su wants him to do such a thing. So is surprised, but Akon's response explained to him what he wants. So assumes that Akon wants So to praise and recommend him in front of all the cadets. The cadet teacher asks which of the captains would like to start, and notices Sao coming up the steps towards him. The captain asks if he would like to start instead of Akon, to which So gives the okay. However, one of the captains who will also be enlisting new cadets tells Sao that they have their own system in place, and the one with the higher ranks starts. Thus it comes out that Sao is the last one. He immediately notices that the messengers of the elders and blood stars are trying to get back at him for his grievances against Akon and his actions. But such an attitude only brings out the spirit of rivalry in Sao and competition with them for candidates. However, from the stage, Sao notices the tremendous fervor of old man Akon, who genuinely doesn't understand why So allowed himself to be put at the end, but Sao justifies it by saying that he will benefit from it that way. Akon tells Su that that's the end of it. If any of them choose not to team with Akon, Su is as surprised as ever at how hard it is to live up to the old man's demands. The messenger from the third elders recommends himself, saying that his head is very good at techniques, and all who go to them will be able to learn top techniques with them. The second elder's messenger also recommended cool techniques and promised to personally train everyone. One by one, they recommended cool techniques to their chapters and promised to teach them to those who joined them. Su and Sudan cringe at such boring advertising, though Su realizes that such advertising is trivial, for the highest rank is hard to attract, and only unique techniques can help them. In a moment, Su notices the man with blue hair who has been standing with a still face the whole time and doesn't even pay attention to the suggestions from the messengers. He looks pretty strong, no wonder all the captains want to pick him up. They say he has passed all the tests with the best score. However, Su focuses his attention on this person's name, Su feels as if he has heard this name and seen this person more than once. After the envoy of the first Blood Star came out, he did not recommend them, but only said that everyone already knew everything, and he would be glad to see anyone in their ranks. Su notices again that this guy with blue hair only paid his attention to the messenger of the first star. Before that, he wasn't interested in anything. The envoy of the first star didn't reveal much, but did explicitly mention that they had been in a place with the first star on the front lines all this time, on peak gay, and would welcome new people. So notices the man's muscles quiver at the mention of gay peak. So suspects he has something to do with the place. And then in a moment, Su's face covered in shock and drops of sweat running down his body. He remembered everything. This man, with blue hair, is an agent of the beggar sect that is near G Peak. That's why this happened. Su knows this from his past life. Su also knows that 6 months from now, this agent will be hunted down and killed after it is revealed that he is an agent of another sect. Sodan asks Su if he is going to help this man, to which Su wonders to Sodan why he would want to help this agent. His goal is only to join the first star. However, here Akon turns to Su and asks him not to miss out on the kid he's been looking at all this time. According to Akon, the kid does look very strong and promising. Su talks about how he's about to go crazy this way, for he has no idea at all how he's going to get all these people to join Akon now, much less an agent. Beck starts laughing at how much of a failure Su has gotten at his job and class, but Akon calls Beck over to him after saying this and smacks him hard on the head. However, by this point, it is already Su's turn to speak. A reflection slips into his mind that this man has already decided exactly where he will go. However, Su does not decide to give up. Su begins his speech by saying that he is as simple a student as they all are. He chose his strategy unique to entice as many, if not all, as possible. Su starts talking about how everyone already knows that he's Akon's apprentice and that he's luckier than everyone else. However, at this point, people don't understand what Su does. In their opinion, he is just bragging and trying to praise himself. Then Su thinks about how he needs to be shorter, because the more he talks, the more they lose the flow of his thoughts. Hence, he goes to the topic of what he started, and after a mini pause, he talks about how he is definitely lucky. He goes on, reminding that not long ago, he was just an ordinary cadet, and he understands all the wants and desires of a cadet, for not long ago he was one himself. Su points to the messenger of the first star and says that he also sees no point in praising his master and the dozens of things he has done. However, this phrase gets Akon's attention. He doesn't understand why the hell Su thought it was useless to talk about him. Su says that all of his words and Akon himself will be exemplified by his students, and then points to the twin brothers and says that a year ago they were foolish cadets, but today they are already captains. Su points once more to his words, saying that it's only 1 year, and they're already captains. Su's words startle the others, and Su himself completes their thoughts by saying that 3 stupid guys became high-scoring captains today. However, from the messengers, Su hears words along the lines that it's all credit to Akon, but not to the guys themselves. However, the cadet teacher reprimands them, saying that Captain Su hasn't finished his words yet. Sodan is furious that the stupid captain allowed himself to interrupt Su, but Su himself finds something good in it, because this way they let him know that his words are convincing. Su points out that Akon has only 3 students, hence a lot of time and ambition. The cadets realize this and talk amongst themselves about this fact. Su reports on how Akon didn't have this many people before, but now he's set his sights on recreating a great faction, and Su talks about how all the cadets here now have the opportunity to be the first foot in a huge endeavor. All he says is wildly infuriating to the other messengers, but very interesting to the candidates, because this proposal is indeed unique in its basis. Su draws an analogy to the dragon, and asks whether the cadets would prefer to be at the end of the tail, or lay the foundation from the head. Su finishes his words by saying that since there aren't many of them, they are all like a family between each other. Akon, on the other hand, plays along with Su at this point, hugging the twins and making a cute face. The candidates are very interested in having a good attitude towards family and the faction as if it were a family, but Sedan is already laughing out loud at Cao's lies, saying that they are nowhere near being like a family. Immediately after Cao's words, the first high-ranking warrior, Ligyu, announces that he wants to join Akon. Cao greets him and tells him that the fourth elder will be very happy to see him, but realizes that if he were this cadet, Cao would have been kicked 5 times already. Akon is immediately happy to see Cao's success so quickly in this set, and hopes to do just as well from here on out. The cadet teacher begins to ask the cadets about their decisions and desires. Cao is insanely nervous, for the candidates are walking side by side to choose their captain, and Akon's desire to form his faction depends on Cao. Another high-ranking candidate named Munchan joins Su, to which Cao is very happy and also greets him cheerfully. Akon laughs at how well things are going, much to his delight, and Beck, meanwhile, jokes about them agreeing to go to hell themselves. However, Su realizes that the whole problem at the moment is the blue-haired bastard, who alone is worth all 5 of the high-ranking ones at once. Cao perfectly understands that to poach his desire will be hard, because his goal is to pass just to the first star. Some advantages do not interest him. Cao is still contemplating on how he should invite someone like this blue-haired man. After all, bringing the captain such a person would be super. However, is it better to try and get him alone or still focus on the others? Cao sincerely realizes that he has no chance to change the mind of a spy who knows his purpose and desires from the beginning. However, Akon's pressure is present. He makes it explicitly clear to Cao that he must take the blue-haired man to Akon. Cao realizes that there isn't much of a choice, because dying at the hands of Akon because of some candidate, Cao doesn't want much. Cao realizes that the worst situation for a spy is to reveal himself. So, thanks to his conversation technique, he addresses the blue-haired man by calling him a beggar, thus letting him know that Cao knows everything. Cao begins to voice the blue-haired man, saying that she knows about his plan to get close to Pika Guy. Spyro immediately realizes what's up and asks Cao what he wants in return for his silence. At the moment of their dialogue, the envoy of the first Bloodstar is already laying a hand on the spy's shoulder and saying that he is glad to see him in the ranks of the first star. After a second, however, he notices that he no longer has that spy's shoulder in his hand. A second after that, the spy finds himself at Cao's feet and asks him to accept him into the ranks of Akon.